Warning, this video will contain spoilers for the entirety of the Beyond Good and Evil series as a whole. Okay, Beyond Good and Evil is one of those games you go into knowing nothing about it, only to be blown away with what's delivered. That can be one of its biggest benefits as well as its flaws, but I'd call it a borderline life-changing experience depending on when and how you ended up playing it. Having originally received the game as a kid to play on the original Xbox with no idea of what to expect, I wondered what this game could possibly be about. A character on the cover with a camera, overlooking a city, and some kind of propaganda poster in the back as well. None of this makes it immediately obvious what you are getting into here, and that can be dangerous for a new IP. I don't even mean that theoretically. The game was a sales failure in the eyes of Ubisoft on release, due in large part to people knowing nothing about it and being unwilling to give it a chance. That's the magic of growing up playing games like these. Some of you might even experience this growing up today. You don't make your own income, and you don't do a ton of research into the games you are about to buy because they are probably bought for you. Maybe you see an ad for a game and ask your parents for it, but for me, my mother would always find something on sale to add to my collection just to give me more to do at home. Due to its failure, Beyond Good and Evil was one of those bargain bin games. When you are handed something to just go and play, you can go into it with a more open mind, prepared to simply experience whatever is about to be thrown at you. Longtime viewers might remember that this was sort of what happened to me with Dragon's Dogma, as I bought it on sale randomly while working at Future Shop / Best Buy in my teens, and like Dragon's Dogma, when I first booted up Beyond Good and Evil, I was blown away. To me, the game felt like something that had never been done before. A blend of every genre I was into at the time. You had action-adventure aspects, you had stealth gameplay, and you even had a collectathon. It was a little bit of everything, and for someone who was into games like Spyro the Dragon, but also getting into series like Splinter Cell with Pandora Tomorrow, it felt like I was experiencing a game made just for me. Something that was trying to push the boundaries of what a game was and what it could be about. Beyond Good and Evil is a very special game to me, a game that I grew up playing countless times, one that I got stuck in and completely confounded by, one I had to come back to over and over again until I could figure out how to beat it. How to collect everything there was to collect and how to unlock everything there was to unlock. Something that made me realize the range the game could cover in terms of genre and mechanics. But what exactly is Beyond Good and Evil? Within the game, you play as an investigative journalist who takes part in missions to earn income for her family, a group of orphans she looks after on a lighthouse island found on the small planet of Hillys. A game set in a spacefaring age that wouldn't focus on space exploration, but more about the life of those stuck on a planet under siege, focusing on normal individuals trying to survive the best they can. Jade, the protagonist, isn't some superhuman, at least not to begin with. She's just a person, a reporter, trying to earn income so that her family has a shield over their head for whenever there is an attack by the game's hostile alien race, the Doms. This aspect of character is reflected in the gameplay. Jade can't fight against countless enemies. If she's in combat, she probably needs help, or she just needs to run. She can fight, but the odds are generally not in her favor. Stealth is more beneficial for someone who is your average human, rather than some sort of trained soldier or Superman. You need a job to survive, you need to make money, and put yourself into dangerous situations so you can make more and more income, whether that be credits or the occasional pearl in this game. You can use this income to upgrade your little hovercraft so that you can go to new places and repeat the process. And that's kind of the game. Sure, there's that whole alien invasion plot where you try to prove to the greater populace that the militaristic faction ruling over your planet is taken over by the bad guys, but there's so much more to explore and do that the overall storyline is just a scratch on the surface. It's an adventure around Hillys. You have a small open world section to explore, multiple mini dungeons with mini games to complete for pearls and money, a small city that slowly opens up to you as you progress, and even more minigames within. It feels like a chill adventure you can take at your own pace, only to get darker and darker as you progress and find out more about what's really going on with the government and military. I love it. It's all about creating a believable, beautiful world, currently occupied under a fascist regime. There's a mystery to solve, crimes to be brought to light, And your normal character and her uncle, a giant pigman hybrid, are the ones that have to put themselves in danger to save those they care about. Jade is an incredibly relatable and mature character. She's quiet for a large portion of the game, but what she does say feels grounded in reality. A woman with a lot of responsibility on her shoulders and love in her heart for those that she cares about. Her relationship with her uncle pey'j feels real, and through that we learn to appreciate them, making us more emotionally involved in their experiences. It's one of the reasons the game has stuck with me for so long, because I felt like I was playing a real person dealing with unreal circumstances. Now, just so you guys are aware of it, I generally try to play these games as they come out. So if I was to play Beyond Good and Evil today, I'd want to play the PC port of the original release. However, the 20th Anniversary Edition recently released, which sports an updated UI and controls for PC, updated graphics, and a little bit of additional content that is tied to the sequel that we are probably never going to see released in our lifetime. Everything that there is to talk about regarding the game from 2003 is still present within the 20th Anniversary Edition. So I opted to play this version so we can both talk about the game in retrospect and also look at some small additions added while mentioning the sequel. For example, there's a new treasure hunt mini quest to complete where you get codes from one locker to the next, picking up video discs known as M-discs in the game that shed light on the characters from the next game in the series. Do I have some gripes with the remake? Sure. I think some of the characters look more stiff and worse off in the update. I'm not a huge fan of how Double H looks now in comparison to how he did in the past. Apparently some of the textures are AI upscaled as well, which I always find incredibly lazy when wanting to remaster something. Luckily, many of the more noticeable textures seem to have been reworked by hand, with a lot of aspects of characters' clothing, skin, and hair having way more detail and depth to them than we are used to. It gets to a point where it almost feels out of place. It's like those HD texture skins for Minecraft games where they just take a picture of a real rock or a real cow and slap it on an assortment of cubes, thinking that's what it means for something to be high definition. So today I'd love to talk to you guys about one of my favorite games, one that was developed by Ubisoft of all companies. I know that can be hard to believe with their current track record. We'll go through the development history of the series and take a look at everything the game has to offer. Before we begin, if you enjoy these videos, please consider helping out by liking, commenting, and subscribing. Every little bit helps. With that out of the way, I'm Super Red, and this is the big Beyond Good and Evil retrospective. Beyond Good and Evil is one of the more interesting development histories I've covered so far, but what's really important to know is that the 20th Anniversary Edition added an entire behind-the-scenes catalog that documents a huge portion of the development process. Things like when the game was getting on its feet, to the vertical slice demo, even to a flood at the team's studios. This may be in bad taste, but there's a boatload of information to be found within the 20th Anniversary Edition, and if that's something you care about, I recommend getting your hands on it. A lot of what I talk about here will come from that information. But another large chunk of my research pulls from various interviews and articles from the early 2000s to today. In 1999, when the Ubisoft Montpellier and Paris divisions were finishing up work on Rayman 2, the Paris team would begin working on Rayman 3, while Michel Ancel, the creator of Rayman, wanted to start work on a brand new IP. Montpellier would begin the task of creating Beyond Good and Evil at this time, a game meant to be a trilogy series if the original was successful, and, spoilers, it wasn't. It wasn't at all. It was originally thought up as a game codenamed Merlin the Magician, centering around a boy and some sort of pet. The plan would eventually shift to a game centered more around immense urbanization, following a young girl and her adventures in this futuristic yet familiar world. Even as early as 1999, the concept of a young girl taking care of orphans was already a major plot point for the team, and this would easily shift into the design for Jade and the kids in the Lighthouse within the final product. Mechanics like traveling wide stretches of land, trading with merchants, and even the DOMs were being created at this point. Although the DOMs were more of a religious cult before becoming what we see in the game proper, with the setting shifting from purely urban to a more sci-fi and cyberpunk aesthetic. From the get-go, the team had lofty ambitions for the game, ones I would say were already too big for what was possible at the time. With multiple planets to explore and spacecrafts that would allow you to travel from one to the next, the idea was to feature multiple planets, cities, and people, all with a heavy Mediterranean influence. Stealth also seemed to be a big aspect of the game design even early on, with Michel wanting to focus less on combat and create a more unique gameplay experience, which would later evolve into the camera and journalism functions we know and love today. Ambitions were so high that the team even had to make their own in-house engine for the project, titled the Jade engine, where everything would be done within the program, including animations in real time, allowing the team to pause cutscenes or gameplay and edit things on the fly. This practice is fairly commonplace nowadays, but was revolutionary at the time. The engine was so powerful that it ended up being used for multiple other Ubisoft projects, including Prince of Persia: Sands of Time, which came out around the same time as Beyond Good and Evil. Even today, parts of the engine are still used at Ubisoft due to how powerful it was mechanically. The storylines of Jade and pey'j went through multiple reworks as development carried on, such as the game being a story about a girl named Sally, her brother, and their adoptive uncle, although pey'j was already a pig hybrid at this point and would stay that way moving forward. The name Sally stuck long into development before finally being changed to Jade after the game engine, and not the other way around as you may have assumed or expected. Around 2000 was when designs of characters like the Alpha Sections, the military that oversees the planet, began to be figured out. Sally also would see further design developments that got her looking closer to the Jade we know today. However, this initial design would stick around for the majority of development before a late character design change near release. Until then, Sally would see a few different outfit changes, but not much else. Multiple other features of the game were being theory crafted at this point. Open areas to explore, platforming, and more confined dungeon experiences were all being developed early on, with the factory section being one of the first and most developed areas the team focused on that would make it into the game as the second real dungeon experience, although I believe it was meant to be the first before reworks set Black Isle before it. The rats that populate large portions of these sections were originally planned to be huge swarms that Jade would have to deal with, but as we will see with many of the team's loftier goals, these would become more tame and limited later on. The rats, for example, appear in smaller numbers and act more as a small annoyance for the player rather than a real threat. Even the designs of the DOMs seem to be heavily figured out by this point, with Ridley Scott levels of foreign alien architecture and aesthetic. Puzzle mechanics of the game were also being figured out, such as the electrical conductivity gameplay that would appear in multiple dungeons, and the camera began to make a more prominent appearance in documentation, with the shape of the gameplay loops starting to appear as the project's identity was built upon. The camera used to pay you for taking pictures of damning evidence against the Alpha Sections, and the cost would be based around what was collected in a single image. Did you get a picture of Double H while he was being lobotomized, and was the DOM's crystal committing the act in view as well? Those factors could change the value of the picture you sell to the Iris network, known as Spoon at the time. This would later get changed to focus purely on animals for income, with the investigative aspect becoming much more confined, usually requiring specific sets of images to be taken rather than the freeform combinations we saw previously. That's a bit disappointing, right? The aspect of documenting biological life on the planet for income is an interesting one. Pokemon Snap was popular for a reason, you know? But having the investigative designs of the game be more freeform could have led to more opportunities for creativity using the camera. Finding just the right angle and timing for a photo sounds more challenging, engaging, and entertaining than simply capturing a specific image that is always standing still and ready for you to take it. Even when the shift to photographing animals took place, the game seemed to try to offer more surrounding that, making it so you used to have to deliver those pictures to an NPC known as the Collector. Even visiting his gallery gallery and maybe seeing your pictures on display. Even as the game shifted in design, it still tried to add more adventure and depth where it could. Still, parts of the game ended up doomed to be simplified and streamlined in order to fit within a reasonable scope of time that was available to the team. That's one of the major things we see in the development of Beyond Good and Evil. The devs had big dreams and lofty ambitions that had to constantly be shaved away to make something more realistic. Something that I think ended up being true for the sequel as well, which has constantly shown us almost unbelievable gameplay, only for the game to sink further and further into what we can only assume is development hell. A big part of all of this might be Michel Ancel, the director of the game. In September of 2020, while working on Beyond Good and Evil 2, Michel retired from game development to work at a wildlife sanctuary. Announcing it via a post on Instagram, Ancel assured fans that his two current projects, those being Wild and Beyond Good and Evil 2, were being left in good hands. That's not the main issue though, it's what came after. Shortly following his departure, Ancel was written about in Liberation, a French daily newspaper, explaining that he was leaving during investigations into workplace toxicity in regards to his management style centered around Beyond Good and Evil 2. Kotaku, an online blog that I'm sure you're all aware of by this point, translated the article to English with excerpts explaining how Ancel was so difficult to work with as a manager, and that other management would have to be brought on just so people didn't need to interact with him. These alleged issues included fluctuating design decisions regularly, making it difficult for the team to get anything done due to the sweeping changes. If this is the issue that Beyond Good and Evil 2 was suffering from for years, and we see this sort of feature creep slash design bloat all of the way back in the original, it makes sense to assume that the major changes in design were the fault of Michel's managerial skills. Having everyone dream big and then constantly wanting to change things or having to bring things back to a more realistic design structure. The original game even saw a small delay during the process. Imagine a sequel game multitudes larger in scope suffering the same problems. It's no wonder that the game hasn't seen the light of day yet. Michel was also accused at the time of belittling employees. He would later claim on Instagram that all of this was fake news, his words, claiming it was timed alongside sexual allegations and investigations against other staff at Ubisoft to make him look worse. However, the reporting seems to be clearly based on the testimonies of select employees rather than hundreds, as he implies Liberation tried to make it seem. And whether the information is true or not, there seems to be a history with the series' goals leading to large changes and delays. Still, there was a vision at this point with the original. A game that didn't focus on combat, but instead on exploration and the struggles of trying to find the truth of what is going on in your world, what truth really is, and how a game could be made centered around that. Games have always had the opportunity to be more experimental, and many have pushed the envelope at the time, but I'd say that this creativity and risk-taking is more prevalent now, with games being more accessible as a development hobby. This also normalizes less traditional gameplay experiences compared to some time like 2003. Making Beyond Good and Evil was clearly a risk for this reason, and would also be one of the reasons it failed commercially. 2001 would see production on the game's vertical slice being finalized. A vertical slice is essentially a small chunk of the game to be demoed internally to show how progress has been going for the team. The demo included the hangar from the Lighthouse and getting the hovercraft up and running, as well as the Black Isle and factory dungeons. Small design details were planned for various aspects of the dungeons at this point, but would later be canned. An example would be the Oxy Pills item that would have been used to deal with poisonous gas. Alongside this, the story continued to mature. The politics of the Alpha Section's oppression begin to see fruition, with more themes surrounding propaganda beginning to appear. The emotional design of the game saw fine-tuning as well, with the scene of pey'j being captured during the factory section. A huge emphasis on companionship is one of the game's major focuses. Just the dialogue between the two is enough to show a history with Sally and pey'j, not just about their past either. The two characters bounce off one another during gameplay, often having plenty to say even when fighting against the Dom's creatures in their hovercraft. We slowly begin to feel the bond between the two characters because the chemistry of their dialogue feels natural and shows us that they have a past and familial love for one another. something the team wanted to focus on heavily, and that makes losing Pey'j in the moment all the more difficult to process for both Sally or Jade and the player. Originally, the team wanted to have 4 to 5 sidekicks for Sally/Jade, but this was later condensed down to just Pey'j and H, usually without the two of them together. I imagine this is because the size of the levels and the design of the final product worked better with single companions at a time over such a large number, and the game began to be balanced around that. There's even footage in the behind the scenes showing a lost level within a satellite where Jade is with Pey'j, H, and 2 robots who all work together to attack the alpha sections, showing that this seemed to be pretty far into development before these major changes were made. Designs for the characters continued to shift, although Pey'j and Sally looked relatively the same throughout. The same can be said for H, who had his entire design seemingly completed from the get-go, sans his face, which wouldn't make an appearance in development until 2002. And while many of the finer details of gameplay may have ended up different from what the vertical slice had shown us, the factory and Black Isle look incredibly close to what the finished product would end up being, suggesting it was around this time that what the team was dreaming up had finally been limited and contained. Whether this included all aspects of design by this point, though, I'm unsure. Concepts like the escape from the Slaughterhouse race into the dungeon proper were already seeing conceptualization, and the greater themes of the game, such as the human trafficking aspect, were also coming to light. There are other examples of content that would later change. The game had a mana resource at one point known as Materia that Jade would use for spells, a feature later scrapped, I imagine to keep Jade as a more relatable player character rather than a special, powerful one. Jade also didn't fight with her Daijo yet, but rather hand-to-hand, which seemed to be even more limiting than combat was in the final product. This is most likely due to the team not wanting to focus on it. Space and aerial combat also seemed more involved, as I mentioned previously, and would eventually be limited to 2 major battles and very limited exploration of the moon. As an aside, Ansel has been on record stating that the attacks of September 11th caused some of the biggest shifts in design for the game, with more focus on the criticism of pro-war propaganda that we saw from the Bush administration. 2002 would see the team's first foray into bringing Beyond Good and Evil into the public eye with an appearance at E3. The game was publicly announced on May 16th, and May 22nd was when the team headed down to LA to show it off. Wikipedia states that the game wasn't well received here, but I couldn't find any actual evidence of this claim. Both the behind-the-scenes footage and interviews from journalists suggest that the game looked very impressive, although it was on the sidelines a bit in comparison to Rayman 3 and other Ubisoft titles. This idea of poor reception seems to come from a Game Informer interview where Ansel says that there wasn't a lot of interest or applause, despite journalists writing positively about the game. But from what I can tell, the game was praised from development to release despite development changes. Now, according to Ansel, Miyamoto and Iwata of Nintendo had the opportunity to play the game at E3 and hated everything they experienced and told him to look at Super Mario Sunshine for an example of a good camera. He explains this to Tim Schafer during a playthrough of the game for a podcast years later. Despite that, the game continues to take shape now, with H getting his face and further developments. There are plenty of aspects of the design that still ended up getting removed. For example, the idea that the Doms were a friendly race of aliens with a faction of them turning evil at some point in time, or the alpha sections having vilifying propaganda against the Doms and being bullies towards them. Even one of the companions was going to be a Dom's species individual named Toil, who would at some point unlock Jade's secret powers, and the Naj would be the real antagonists who seemed to use the alpha sections to antagonize the Doms. The Nash, Doms, and alpha sections would all become consolidated after the fact to help create a more focused storyline on war, propaganda, and the oppression of civilians. While Pey'j is a pig hybrid, he was classified as a hybrid clone back then. The BTS section suggests that this was supposed to be explored in the prequel. I'm currently unsure if this has ever been confirmed before, but it seems very clear that Beyond Good and Evil 2 is a prequel to the original game, and I imagine a third game would end up being the finale of the trilogy, as that's what Michel Ansel originally seemed to envision. While the game was originally set to release earlier in 2003, it would have some delays and would also make another appearance at E3 of that year. Since the game was close to release, more fine-tuning work was done to make the game as engaging as possible, such as combat becoming more of a focus in hopes it would create better sales, rather than complementing the themes and design of the game. Action segments were designed around 5 internal stats the team used, those being stress, sync, precision, memory, and cleverness. Although how these were actually measured and what some of them fully meant, I'm unsure. I'm also unaware of why the game was delayed specifically, but my best guess has to do with the fact that it was deemed too short. Because of this, Ubisoft Casablanca was brought on to create extra content for the game, most notably the Looter's Caverns, where you race against a looter who has stolen some funds out of your wallet in order to win some money back, as well as a pearl. These were originally known as the Crazy Old Man maps, as instead of chasing looters, you were chasing some older individual. On top of the caverns, Casablanca also worked on content like the optional Alpha Section stealth areas found within the city of Hillys, and maybe the 1 or 2 that are outside of it as well. In terms of optional content, I find these to be the best in the game alongside the caverns, and they were done in a way that didn't feel plastered on. Everything feels like it's naturally part of the final product, and many of the stealth sections even help make the city feel better than was possible due to the limitations at the time. E3 2003 seemed to offer a more positive reception than 2002, most likely because journalists had more to get their hands on with the demo, allowing them to play through the opening levels of the game. Afterwards, around July to August, Jade saw her biggest rework as her design became finalized, as did pey'j's. The idea was that the team wanted to create more mature and darker designs for the characters. And by mature and darker, I don't mean edgy, but legitimately mature. Jade looks more adult, more grown, wearing clothes that seem to fit her profession and actions better than the long sleeve and giant pants she had on before. The colors of her jacket and bandana now matched her namesake, and her iconic green lipstick, which had persisted throughout development, continued to do so. If you own the 20th Anniversary Edition, you also have access to the entire press kit translated for you to read, which is a fantastic avenue for further insight into the game's design. Multiple lost levels are also displayed behind the scenes, some of them unearthed beforehand by a community group known as Beyond Good and Evil Myth. These include things like a hovercraft section in the factory, which was sorely missing one, a combat arena found within the city, the collector's gallery, and the satellite level I mentioned earlier, utilizing 4 companions at the same time. There were also more explorable areas with the beluga that would have allowed us to attempt more skillful flying within confined corridors, while also solving puzzles or defeating enemies. This flying section would have led into a secret base where you would have had to fight 2 Reapers instead of 1, and you would have eventually rescued Toil before he unlocked your special powers. There would have also been a secret cave on Hillys where you could find a giant upside-down model of Rayman as a nod to the team's previous work. Upon release, the reception of the game was rather poor, as Ansel points out in interviews, believing it to be due to the fact that the game didn't convey to the players what they would be doing within it very well. Considering the cover is a woman holding a camera, it's difficult to explain or convey something about the game with the cover alone, and considering how unique the gameplay was, I'm not surprised people brushed it off as shovelware when games like Prince of Persia were coming out and more heavily marketed by Ubisoft. In fact, marketing was something that Beyond Good and Evil was missing out on, considering it could have helped give players a more concrete idea of what to look forward to. Due to these poor sales, plans for the sequel were halted, and it was only after the game started to gain cult popularity that we saw a bigger push for the series to continue, leading into the now cursed development of Beyond Good and Evil 2. Now let's take some time to see how all of this was presented in the final product. We'll start with the opening and explore the storyline of the game while checking out some of the optional content and exploration I mentioned firsthand. As the game opens, we are immediately met with a news broadcast bestowing information on our setting. Hillys is a small mining planet. There's a bustling but relatively mild population, and it's been rather peaceful up until now. Over time, however, the Doms, a hostile alien race, has been encroaching throughout the galaxy. Now Hillys seems to be encircled by Dom's forces, and war is on the horizon. A war said to be between the Doms and everyone else, with the Alpha sections at the forefront of combating them. General Keck, I know, offers a press conference to the people of Hillys, an audio segment we will hear continuously throughout the game as we progress, showcasing just how much reach the alpha sections have, slowly taking over the Hillians' media in what can only be called propaganda. As the scene shifts onto Hillys proper, we get our first introduction to Jade. Life on the Lighthouse Island is peaceful. Jade takes time to meditate with one of the adoptive kids here. This isn't a character who we will see go from an inexperienced youth to growth throughout the journey, but someone who has already learned about life and is now bestowing her wisdom onto a younger generation. That doesn't mean Jade has nothing to learn or nothing to grow from, but it shows that we are going to be playing as a grounded individual with history. This scene alone shows us that Jade has a past, that she has learned how to find peace within herself. Of course, that peace will be tested constantly, almost immediately in fact, as sirens blare, informing the civilians of Hillys of an upcoming Dom's attack. Michelle Ansel has mentioned that this immediate opening segment with Jade and pey'j being introduced was inspired by the movie Snatch, due to the similarities between the freeze frame and character name drop that can be seen both within this game and the movie. Meant to both introduce the characters and show them rushing to action, we get more insight into the type of person Jade is. She wants to get the orphan children to safety, but is met with an issue. The shield that would normally protect their island isn't working, and the reason is due to a lack of funds. Even during these war-torn times, protection and safety is still directly tied to one's ability to accrue income. Something that should be a right, considering it is no fault of their own that the war is here, is instead a commodity that someone else profits off of. And while that isn't directly explored as much as it could be, it shows a commentary on the value of human life versus the value of labor. Hillys is willing to lose people if they can't pull their supposed weight, even when that weight may be affected by the war. With no shield to protect them, the island is free to be pelted by various Dom's meteors, eggs, pods, whatever you would call them. These pods seem to house various forms of Dom's life, most prominently the sarcophagus Domzi, that have the ability to capture and control various forms of life. This is first seen as one of the pods hits the section of the ground near the children and causes a sinkhole to form, causing them to fall in, only to rise back out within the sarcophagi. This is our first introduction to combat, and while combat will not be the focus of the game, it seems this section was added so new players would at least be aware that it would be a factor. Like I mentioned, it wasn't possible to easily parse what this game would be about. While it may be fine to start the game with picture taking and cataloging, I'm sure the team were informed they should showcase the more action-packed aspects of the game first before anything else. Unfortunately, I feel this gives the players the wrong impression of what they are getting into. There will be combat, sure, but we won't be seeing a lot of it aside from some dungeons. Thinking about it, the game is incredibly front-loaded in this sense. There's combat at the start, and Black Isle, the first dungeon we will be exploring, has countless enemies for us to mess around with. This will be less of the case when we reach the factory and slaughterhouse dungeons that focus more on stealth while still offering shorter combat segments and boss fights. Sometimes. The issue is compounded here because the combat is also not particularly in-depth. So not only are you conveying to the player that the combat will be at the forefront, you are letting them know that it's rather bare bones at the same time. Jade can't do much within a fight because it's not the focus. You swing your daijo around over and over again until you've killed all the enemies. It's a single button pressed over and over without any variety. However, to its credit, the gameplay is incredibly smooth within this section. While not having much of a free camera as you may expect for an action segment, the game is very good at keeping Jade centered within the action and placing enemies in a way that they were always within view, especially with the sarcophagi. Similar to games like Arkham Asylum, you can freely move and attack enemies, and the game will naturally target them based on which direction you are aiming. And to add flavor to the experience, Jade has various attack animations that she uses seemingly randomly at times for cinematic flair, as well as increased effectiveness. Like, there's a very powerful multi-hit combo that will kill one of the Doms in short work, but I could never figure out a way to get this to happen every time. Instead, the combat seems to be designed to be watched rather than interacted with. Sure, you are pressing the buttons and Jade will attack what you tell her to, but how that actually plays out feels up in the air, at least initially. This is less the case when fights become more puzzle-based, as we will see later on as we reach Black Isle. After dealing with the sarcophagus Domsey, Jade gets pulled into the sinkhole by a spirit eater, one of the more prominent Dom species that seems to have the ability to summon lesser versions such as the sarcophagi. Here we are introduced to Pey'j, Jade's uncle, who rescues her, and we also learn that we have a charge attack that we can make use of to deal AoE damage to enemies around us. This can later be upgraded to shoot projectiles at the same time, but I wish it couldn't, as it has the ability to trivialize many of the stealth sections in the game. Additionally, Jade has the first of her visions, alluding to the idea that she is somewhat special in comparison to others, although this isn't much reflected in the gameplay. Originally, I assumed this was just the Dom's priestess talking to her within her mind, but it's actually a connection between the two that will be made clearer later on. Again, these boss fights and combat sequences are as simplistic as they can be, but that's understandable considering they are not the focus, and probably were not originally intended to be implemented to the level that they were. Still, the team went above and beyond with the cinematography at the same time, as well as the soundtrack composed by Christoph Herral, which is honestly too good for the combat that it's backing. In fact, the entire soundtrack to the game is unlike anything I had heard at the time upon playing it initially, and still holds up even today, with the 20th anniversary version being available on music streaming platforms if you want to give it a listen. I'm not gonna outwardly feature it here for, I feel like, obvious YouTube reasons. Once the Spirit Eater has been dealt with, the alpha sections will conveniently swoop in to save the day, even though all of the action is over and done with. Jade and Pey'j are brought out of the sinkhole and met with the news reporter we had previously seen during the opening. We are beginning to see just how close the media is to the military in this regard, often licking the boot of the alpha sections and trying to paint them in a positive light despite them doing absolutely nothing to actually help anyone or anything on the planet, a fact that Pey'j is acutely aware of. While Jade is a little more laid back when a mic is shoved into her face, Pey'j is very outspoken against the alpha sections, criticizing them for only showing up when it's convenient. As Ansel pointed out, this is a commentary and criticism on the pro-military, pro-war propaganda of the Bush administration after the events of 9/11. This is also where we get our hands on our first pearl, a finite resource in terms of game mechanics that acts as our main collectible in the game. We can't do anything with them initially, but we will later be able to trade them in for various upgrades to our hovercraft. In the meantime, there is still one major issue that needs to be taken care of. The Lighthouse is without a shield, and we need to earn funds in order to get it back online. What better way than introducing to us the true main mechanic of the game, photography? Jade has an inventory device known as an SAC, or SAC, and within it she hosts a digital AI known as Secundo. To help Jade and the gang out, Secundo hooks them up with the director of a science center for the documentation of all biological life on the planet, basically taking a picture of every type of species that exists. This will be our main way of accruing income within the game and leads to a secondary collectathon with a few missables here and there, meaning you really need to be on top of it in order to get 100% completion. Photography works like this. You find a species to take a picture of, and the game will have a little circle telling you if your shot is clear and within the right range. Once it is, the circle goes from red to green, and snapping the shot will count towards your film reel for the science center. Every so many pictures will fill out a reel, and doing so will unlock you something in the process. The first reel gets you a longer lens so you can zoom further with your camera, and subsequent ones each offer a pearl as a reward. It's a little unfortunate that the game didn't have more utility items that would upgrade various aspects of Jade or her camera for completing collections of animal pictures, maybe like a X-ray lens or a thermal lens or something that could be used later on in the gameplay. This could have been a great way of having a secondary progress wall that required you to explore more and check areas you normally wouldn't for organic life you didn't expect to find. Instead, we get one nice upgrade for our camera and nothing else that's overly important. Pearls are great, sure, but we get an abundance of them throughout our travels. The animal collecting aspect of the game isn't a necessity, and I think making it one would have added more value to the idea, especially since the camera is meant to be used to help the player take in their surroundings better. Why not put more emphasis on it in order to facilitate that? Various forms of life already exist on the island for us to take pictures of. Each different form of sapient creature, for example, counts as their own category in the film reel. Goat people, human people, shark people later on, etc. Plus various insects and non-sapient wildlife as well. There's even some sort of otter on top of the lighthouse that you can snap a picture of after you get the extended zoom. One that is only there until the lighthouse gets destroyed later on in the game as an example of one of those potential missable animals. On top of our camera, Secundo also introduces us to our inventory system via the sack. Beyond Good and Evil uses a radial inventory, where you use the analog stick to select a subsection that opens up into its own menu, allowing you to quickly access various aspects of your inventory. I'd like to say it's intuitive, but it can feel a bit complicated the first time you use it. For example, I didn't realize that when selecting a character or vehicle that wasn't Jade, each of these had their own sub-inventory I could access. I found myself scratching my head trying to find the new cosmetics this way as an example. Hansel is on record mentioning that many did not see his vision for the inventory system later on, and it only started to make more sense as it neared completion. This is probably true for the text input system as well, although I think that is one of the best designs in both the game and the greater gaming market. Beyond Good and Evil's text input system is borderline revolutionary for its time and one of the best ways of creating the system for gamepads that I have ever seen. Using an ascending and descending radial system that loops, players can easily find any letter or number they are looking for and quickly input semi-complex combinations of alphanumerics in order to type out codes or passphrases for various locked doors and containers found throughout the game. The system has been praised heavily in design circles since its inception, and I'm surprised I haven't seen it used more regularly in games that have heavy text input requirements on consoles. Many aspects of the inventory and text design are just to die for. I especially enjoy that every item you obtain can be fully examined within the system, and this is even used for gameplay purposes, such as finding hidden codes on items by rotating them, such as Pey'j's jet boots later on after the factory section. Every aspect of the game is utilized, rather than being there just for the sake of it. And that shows real intent and direction that allows the game to feel so fluid. Everything we see and interact with will have purpose, and be built in a way where it interacts with other features of the game. Things feel real, interactive, and malleable, no matter how small. Once we take a couple of pictures, credits will automatically be deposited to the electric company, and we'll be able to turn the shields back on. Additionally, Jade seems to have a mission available to her in regards to her reporting occupation, meaning more opportunities to secure income for her family. This also means we get an opportunity to fully explore the lighthouse and take in the artistic design of the game. Listen, I'm not the world's biggest Rayman fan. I'm not saying I don't like it, but it's also just not one of those games I ever put a ton of focus into. Saying that though, I can still see a lot of heavy artistic overlap between the two. Beyond Good and Evil goes for a more mature design with the creatures and people found within the world, but all of the color, almost like a painting, continues to shine through. And many of the smaller animal designs we will see look like they could have been placed in a Rayman game directly, and you wouldn't have known they were from a different series. The charm of the design has managed to carry over here, and many of the areas we will explore will shift from beautiful to dreary to almost nightmarish in a way that feels natural. Look at the beauty we are experiencing at the moment and then compare it to the nightmarish body horror of the DOMs. It's a great contrast in that sense. This contrast even exists within the alpha sections. We see them as militaristic but cartoonish, with their big green weak points displayed for everyone to see, and they slowly become more and more nightmarish as they take off their helmets and show the corruption that has been enacted on them. The lighthouse looks heavily lived in. There are spaces for the children to sleep and furniture spread around for them to sit on, and they will actively move around the island to explore the outside as well as sit in the interior to listen to the radio. There's a space for the dog, and you can even chase him down to get a healing item out of his mouth. This was originally going to be the method by which you acquired the camera. Some of these items we find within the lighthouse are going to be found often throughout the game. Starkos and K-Bups are your generic healing items, with one healing you a single heart and the other healing you to full. Meanwhile, a PA1 is the maximum health increase item that we can find throughout our journey. Unlike some games, these upgrades stay within our inventory and we can actively trade them back and forth with our companions. If you somehow find that pey'j is always dying in combat, something that should never happen, you can give him a few upgrades to help him get through the zone. You can even trade healing items with him that he will use when necessary. Inventory management for combat scenarios is a little more involved than you may originally think, although it's still more bare bones than your typical action game and not heavily necessary. All in all, you can tell there was care put into this location, an attempt to make the details as dense as possible so you felt like this really was your home, even if a lot of the pictures on the wall are heavily repeated throughout. Something I thought they may have tried to fix in the remaster, but I guess not. A little jarring considering how much detail was put everywhere else. Once we have seen all there is to see, we can get into pey'j's workshop / the hangar to find our new mission in the form of an M-Disc. M-Discs are communication discs, usually with video or pictures of some kind. When Iris releases an issue of their Rebel magazine, it's in the form of an M-Disc, but these can be slideshows / videos as well, as we see with the 20th anniversary treasure hunt. In a way, these discs are collectibles in themselves, adding something extra for you to find along your journey. As of the 20th anniversary edition, there are about 18 in total. All M-Discs can be read on readers, which are located throughout Hillys and within dungeons. This is also the main way you save the game, although for some reason, the 20th anniversary edition changed how this works slightly. In previous iterations, you could have multiple save files, yet now you can only have one, and for what reason, I have no idea. This means that if you want to save your game after the point of no return, you are stuck there with no way of going back other than starting a new game. It feels like an unnecessary and limiting change, I assume due to something involved with the new treasure hunt or some other anniversary change, but again, I have no idea why. It's also just a slow process regardless. Having to access the reader, insert your disc, and then save your game takes time both through saving and the simulations involved. Rather than having us do this every time we want to save, it would have been nice to have free access via the menu system. At the very least within the remaster of all things. I'm sure there are limiting factors that may have prevented this, but that's sort of the idea behind remastering something. Adding in quality of life functions that do not necessarily affect the gameplay experience, but just make the menial meta tasks easier. Sometimes saving is directly tied to the core gameplay of whatever you're playing, but I don't feel that's justified here, as readers are both plentiful and essentially unlimited. There's never any real risk that you won't make it back to a reader before you die. Plus, the game autosaves periodically per room, so dying doesn't even set you back that far. I just want easy manual saves for when I need to do something suddenly and I get pulled away from the experience. If we check the mission disc we were given, we will learn that a Mr. de Castellac has an important mission for us involving the war. When Jade asks pey'j if he knows anything about this guy, something seems to freak him out and he suggests not going, as if he was worried about her safety. But what pey'j knows about this individual won't be revealed for some time. De Castellac wants us to head to Black Isle, but this is around the time that everything starts to open up for us, meaning there's a lot of exploration opportunities. The only issue is that our hovercraft, our main means of getting around, is currently out of commission and needs to be charged up. This is our first example of companions working alongside Jade in the game. We need to push a battery towards an electrical conduit so that we can charge the hovercraft, but it's too heavy for Jade to do it herself. Just by attempting, pey'j will immediately rush to action so that he can help out. This may sound pretty mediocre, but the idea that a companion could help the player character and be useful at a moment's notice, basically instantly, was a big deal back in the day. Companions in games were usually utilized as escort quests, often lambasted for being awful and making a game a worse experience. For Jade's friends to be useful, smart, and rarely if ever in your way was a big deal and helped add to the game rather than detract from it. We'll get to see more examples of this once we reach Black Isle. Despite recharging our hovercraft, it is still in immense disrepair. In order to get it fixed, we need to try and get it to Mammago Garage. Unfortunately, the vehicle stalls out about halfway there and we have to get towed the rest of the way. Mammago Garage is the upgrade or progression hub of the game. Whenever we need a new feature for our hovercraft, this is where we are going to end up, and the only currency they work with is pearls. However, this is where the collectathon may feel at its weakest. One of the better aspects of a game like Spyro is that most of a level, or multiple levels, can be near fully completed before you reach the first progression wall. This can give you the satisfaction of knowing that you are ahead of the curve moving forward. If you 100% the initial hub area, the second area won't take as long unless you want to put effort into 100%ing it as well. This sort of causes an effect where you complete everything you can anyway, so there's no real sense of a break, but the idea that the option is there, that we are breaking ahead of our limitations of what is expected of us, adds to enjoyment of progression. This is not the case in Beyond Good and Evil. While there are plenty of pearls to collect by exploring, many of them will not be available to you until the story dictates. This means that no matter how much you explore, you cannot unlock further exploration options until the game wants you to because you can't afford it despite everything possible being complete. Later on, you can end up having so many pearls that you could buy the next upgrade, but wouldn't you know it, they don't have the item in stock, so you can't buy it. This is obviously a means of preventing skips in the game, but I feel as though this wasn't the greatest way of going about it. Let's say you buy the jump kit upgrade early that lets you reach the races near the Slaughterhouse. You should have no reason to go to the Slaughterhouse at this point in time, so you shouldn't be able to access it. The answer the developers used for this issue was to limit the amount of pearls you could get before it was necessary to go there. But by doing so, you are limiting the player from having free range of exploration around the map. It's not just the Slaughterhouse out there. There are various other looters' caverns and the like as well. Things you could use with the upgrade to get ever further ahead of the curve. So why not limit the Slaughterhouse specifically? If the only way to reach the Slaughterhouse is through a racetrack past a progression wall, just make the races not run until the story calls for it. That way we get to continue exploring and earning pearls or finding animals, and can then loop back around later when it's actually time for the next dungeon. Funny enough, someone actually managed to get the jump kit before the neutralizing cannon by glitching a door to earn one more extra pearl than what was possible in the 20th anniversary edition. They then went to the Slaughterhouse with pey'j, who wouldn't be available normally, and it seems the game crashes as soon as you try to set foot on land. Not really anything to critique here, just a cool little fact that I'm glad someone attempted. Anyway, another new feature of the 20th anniversary edition is the ability to customize your characters. The first of those customization items can be bought here at Mammago, and thank God we finally have more things to spend our money on in this game. If you keep up to date on your funds via animal pictures, you are almost always in a surplus with nothing to spend it on except for maybe healing items. You know, if you're bad at the game. Sorry. Some of the skins are based on Mammago, but many are tied to Beyond Good and Evil 2, as well as an older render of Jade from during development where she's in a red costume instead of a green one. pey'j gets his chef's uniform that we see in one of the sequel trailers. Double H gets a reskin of his costume so he looks more like the elite members of the Alpha sections, and Jade unlocks a pirate costume that she seems to be wearing in some of the earliest trailers for the sequel, including the initial one as well as another involving a chase sequence. There's even vehicle skins for the ship the pirates seem to use named the Gada. Both the Beluga and the hovercraft get their own sets of skins. These aren't just retextures either, many of these change the actual models they are applied to. These smaller shops are scattered throughout Hillys, but usually only sell things like health restoration items. However, they will sometimes have permanent upgrades such as PA1s or the equivalent for our hovercraft that permanently raises its HP. Once the ship is fixed, we can make our way back outside. In terms of controls, I always liken the movement of the vehicle to that of a warthog from Halo. You basically move the direction you want with the left analog stick, and this in turn acts as your acceleration and deceleration. This can sometimes get really confusing in some confined sections, as the camera may switch suddenly to a new angle, or it doesn't consider adjusting what the direction you push means in relation to how you are looking at the craft, causing you to go sideways, backwards, crashing into walls, the works. Maybe they really should have played Super Mario Sunshine. Maybe Miyamoto was right. You won't have much experience with the vehicle yet, but this doesn't stop the developers from throwing you into an immediate boss battle against a giant Dom's snake creature. Ansel mentioned that these segments were based on shmups, specifically mentioning R-Type as an example, while also confirming that this sequence was added at the end of development. You see this shmup design with the flashing effects that activate when the enemy creatures get hit, as well as segments of its body getting destroyed periodically. Despite some confined issues with the camera, it does a great job trying to naturally lock onto the enemy during the fight, allowing you to more freely move around it while keeping it in sight, something Ansel was very happy about during development. I guess the team really wanted to use this fight to beef up the amount of time you spent in the game because it gets added into the same area 3 times, with the difficulty rising slightly, but not really. The second fight gets some meteors spawning in, but we have the targeting cannon now, so it's super trivial. The third fight takes place in the air once we have the beluga, which is even more powerful, meaning the boss stands even less of a chance. And that's something that you're going to see a lot. These bosses are not a threat to you really. I'd say none of them are until maybe the final one at the end of the game, but as I explained earlier, that's kind of the point. These seemed to be added to elongate the experience out of necessity, not for the love of combat. While it would have been shorter, the game may have been better overall simply removing these sections. Still, despite them being simplistic, the action along with the music backing it does add a lot of adrenaline to the calmer parts of the game and helps keep it feeling energetic and alive. This is also the first time you can snap a photo of a creature that is actively hostile to you. For some reason, we aren't just cataloging species native to the planet of Hillys, but species of DOMs as well. Well, the snake creature may actually be a native species to the planet, similar to the Reaper, and somehow controlled by a pearl that has been inserted into it by the DOMs, but I find that is never really clarified in the game. Even if that is the case, you can later take a picture of a sarcophagus DOMZ and they get cataloged as well, so I'm not sure what the actual criteria is here. Logic on the situation aside, because, I mean, it doesn't matter. Let's be real. Making it so we have to take pictures of hostile creatures mid-battle adds an extra layer to the experience, and since you see this 3 times in a single playthrough, even if you miss your first opportunity, you can always try again later. Even better, there's a skull of the snake hidden in a nearby cave, so there's always an opportunity to record it. Why didn't they do that for every missable creature? Who knows? My best guess would be that for some people, me included, missable content is actually a valuable aspect of many games. I like having to pay attention and talk to everyone in a JRPG in order to find hidden quests that may go away as the story progresses. It's the same here. I like that I have to be ready and searching for these creatures in order to achieve 100% completion. That may sound a little unfair considering how hidden some of the animals will be, and I would agree if not for a device we are going to be able to buy a little later that makes it impossible to miss out on the animals as long as you are looking for them as soon as possible. With Hillys temporarily safe once again, we can begin exploring around the map and seeing all there is to offer. This is limiting to the player in 3 major ways. First, there are laser barricades that prevent you from heading further out to sea. When I first played the game as a kid, I assumed that these were just a natural limitation of the game that were meant to be permanent barricades we'd never cross. I swear my mind was blown when I unlocked the jump kit and realized there was essentially another region to explore. Similarly, or rather firstly, there are certain alpha section contraptions that can attach a tractor beam to us and prevent us from accessing certain regions around Hillys. The neutralizing cannon, one of the first upgrades we will be buying, is the only device powerful enough to permanently destroy these so that we can progress. Finally, there are sets of security passes that we will have to unlock along our adventures that will allow us to enter doors found throughout Hillys, including in and out of the city. Currently unlocked content includes things like some of the looters' caverns I've mentioned previously. In these short mini-games, a looter steals some of your current income. I imagine it's percentage-based, and then runs off with it throughout the cavern. You can never outpace the looter, or maybe you can with a large amount of boost items, but there's no real point in attempting that. The real challenge comes from what happens on the track. Every so often you will pass by an electrified cable. What you need to do is try to beat the electrical charge to a nearby door, as once it reaches said door, it will begin to close slowly. So there's no real need to speed through until you reach these specific points in the chase, and there's usually multiple sections of these within the cavern. You can tell how many are left by the number on the door. Gate 2 into Gate 1, and then you trap the looter in an open area where you can finally kill them, making your money back and then some, plus a pearl for your troubles. There's 4 caverns in total, but only 2 are accessible at the moment. The hovercraft really steals the show here. Throughout the entirety of the game, the hovercraft will be one of our main means of getting around and is also used in various minigames to unlock collectibles. Considering this, you'd hope that controlling the vehicle would be a smooth experience, and thankfully it is. It is incredibly satisfying to dodge and weave through tight corridors with it because it handles so fluidly, again, like a warthog in the Halo series. It's no wonder so much content within the game is centered around it. It's also no wonder then that the looters' caverns and races found in Hillys, while simplistic, ended up being some of my favorite sections in the game, and you may understand why I was so disappointed to learn that the factory level had a vehicle section that was scrapped during development. And yeah, there's 4 races in the game we can compete in, and 2 of them are available within the city's canals right from the get-go. They're rather short and not all that difficult, but you do get a payment for hitting first place plus a pearl, and if you get the track record, you get a little bonus payment as well as your name displayed in the Akuta bar found in the city proper. Just a nice little treat to see when you stop by there as a mark of your achievement, especially since this game came out at a time when achievements didn't exist. The Akuta bar is a spot we'll be stopping by frequently. Once you enter the city, you will notice that it is already somewhat occupied by Alpha Section's forces, predominantly the civilian military, not the dudes in black armor. Over nearby speaker systems, you can hear the press conference from General Keck that partially played during the beginning of the game, showing that there is a heavy and oppressive level of propaganda being fed to the Hillians already. On the way to the bar, you can stop by a local newsstand. Here you can optionally subscribe to a couple papers, those being the Hillian Guide and Hillian Word, and you'll periodically get voice messages from these papers. The more interesting of the two is the Hillian Word, since it seems to be heavily tied to pro-Alpha Section's propaganda, often praising the forces and vilifying the Iris Network, framing them as radical terrorists. There's a very big focus on how the media interacts with the oppressors until it ends up being revealed what the Alpha Sections really are, and it's satisfying to see the Hillian Word begin to backpedal near the end of the game. It's also a nice feature to add to a game like this so it can show how your progression is affecting the world at large. News about your exploits is similar to something like news you'd hear on the radio within a GTA game, and makes it feel like you are affecting things. This happens with the city itself as well, as we will begin to see later on. One thing I really appreciate is how they try to make small aspects like transactions in the game feel like they are part of the world rather than just a menu you go through. You don't talk to an NPC and then just choose to buy or sell from a menu. Every single person you talk to that sells something makes you first scan your credit card, so they know you are here to buy and that you have the funds to make a purchase. Then everything available to you is within visual sight and you have to walk up and select it to initiate the transaction. This was something the team had been working on in the early design stages of Beyond Good and Evil, wanting a more lively world where you feel like you are actually taking part in the lives of the NPCs. Trading with merchants, seeing their wares, etc. Taking these aspects out of the traditional game menu system makes it feel less like you are playing a game and more like you are existing within a lived experience. The Akuta bar is open to us as well, and walking in you'll hear another incredibly unique track from Christoph Hral. Something you'll notice throughout the game is how the vibe and culture of the music changes significantly depending on your location. While exploring the outer sections of Hillys, you'll hear some of the most calming, ambient tracks you've probably ever heard within a game. Hitting up Mammago Garage, you'll get a Rastafarian-inspired track to match the theme of the proprietors there, and the Akuta bar has a Czech rap playing during your visits there that Christoph got his hands on by calling up a friend and recording the conversation over the phone. Apparently it was a full conversation that he just turned into a song. Michelle Ansel has said that the conversation was about how people would be scared to speak out against their ever-watchful government, how people feel oppressed and like they can't express themselves without punishment. That's what's really interesting about a lot of the music in this game. You can see with this example that Christoph would often try to find creative ways to convey specific messages in the tracks depending on the situation. The extra layer of work put in and the extra character really feel like they add levels of diversity and culture to the experience. Beyond Good and Evil is, by all accounts, a very unapologetically political and diverse game. The human cast is incredibly varied in race, and many cultures are featured throughout, both in visual and cultural representation, something certain individuals would call woke nowadays and boycott the game over. One of the first things you can do in the Akuta bar is talk to a shark person named Francis, who is by a nearby air hockey table. This is a special version of the game created for Beyond Good and Evil, where you need to get all of the discs through a narrow corridor so there are none left on your side while the opponent is attempting to do the same. Managing this wins you the round, with sets being best of 3. Francis has a pearl he can offer, and this acts as the hard mode version of the minigame, especially since you need to get 1,000 credits to participate. Throughout the game you can bet on 2 pearls and then eventually a code for the nearby locker. The funny thing is, this code used to be obtained online via a website. This code was used to unlock an M-disc that would let you play the air hockey game at any disc reader, with various settings you could change to make for a varied experience. Not the biggest reward, but a cool one since you used to be able to unlock this immediately if you wanted to. Now you get it from Francis in the 20th anniversary edition near the end of the playthrough. Speaking of codes, you can find one nearby that is on a table with another shark person. If you get too close to him, he'll try to hide it from you, but let's be real, he's not hiding shit. The idea was that you could keep your distance and use the camera to peek at the code, but he barely covers it anyway, so it's not that big of a deal. Still a cool little optional use of the camera for a code that you can use shortly after. Within the upper level rooms, you can find a near passed out goat person who has a rather depressing story. Apparently he stole a code from the alpha sections, and in retaliation they took his entire family. Now he just wallows there, defeated, wishing he never did, and gives you the code since he doesn't want to have it anymore. Just another example of how the alpha sections are messing with people's lives, and yet this still isn't readily available, provable information to the greater populace. Finally, you can talk to peepers here to play 3 Coconut Monty. The more you bet, the harder the game gets, but it's really easy to follow along once you understand what each movement he makes does. Jade even seems to follow the ball with her head for at least a portion of this shuffling. Peepers will be a bit more important for us later on, but it's about time we head to Black Isle and see what the job de Castellac has for us actually is, especially since the game constantly prods you with voice messages to remind you to go visit him. I figure these are so the player doesn't forget and lose their way, but they seriously bombard you with the same message over and over until you make your way there, and it feels, more like nagging. Once we arrive at Black Isle, we meet with de Castellac's assistant, who informs us that the Doms have already invaded every corner of the planet. There are 2 specimens within Black Isle's mineshaft, and we are tasked with getting a picture of them to prove their existence. As our first dungeon to explore, Black Isle introduces us to a large swath of mechanics that will be used throughout our adventure. One of the first things you can come across is a chain link fence that we will need to use pey'j to unlock, but only after he finds a special tool that will allow him to do so. Companions are our gateway to progression within these dungeon zones, and pey'j will quickly unlock everything he is able to do right away. First we find he can stand on platforms with us to open doors, then he introduces his jet boots that can be used in and out of combat. Finally, he'll get his wrench with clippers that will allow him to get through the fences I just mentioned. Progress with pey'j may seem a bit rushed, and in truth it is. Pey'j comes and goes in the blink of an eye. Not to get ahead of ourselves, but our next companion also has the same functionality as pey'j, plus the ability to bust open metal bars blocking doorways. Make no mistake, Beyond Good and Evil is a short experience. That's not a bad thing necessarily, but the pacing can feel a bit rushed because of it. Having such grandiose ideas and confining them into such a limited amount of time causes things to get bunched together. pey'j unlocking the jet boots in Black Isle could have been followed up with his power tool in the factory, rather than having everything at once. And then we could have a similar progression with Double H, so it feels like we are unlocking something new every time. Jade does unlock the ability to toss gyro discs eventually and to upgrade her power attack for enhanced combat functionality, but these upgrades are few and not really far between, leaving less to be excited for as you make your way through these areas. The Slaughterhouse and the moon base won't have much for us to actually use and learn about. It's just about using what we already have and making the most out of it. In a game like this, where a sense of progression is so key, it can feel very underwhelming. That's another aspect where this jack of all trades trade-off falls short. The collectathon aspects of the game aren't as sweeping as something you might expect from the PS1 era, and dungeon aspects lack the progression of a more classic Zelda-style experience. While many of these elements end up complementing each other in some fashion, It'd be disingenuous to say many of them do not feel lacking in some way that is not always made up for by having a different mechanic to distract you with. And then what is available within this aspect of the game has its hand shown almost immediately. So pey'j can stand on switches for us at our beck and call. He can launch us into the air with his new ground slam ability, and he can open chain link fences for us. All things he is able to do seamlessly and flawlessly with little hangups. Again, the companions in this game do not feel like a burden. They feel like they are only there to help us progress. Rarely if ever will they get in our way, and the only time they were annoying for me was when I kept accidentally hitting them in combat and they responded by using the same voice lines chiding me over and over again. Pey'j won't even jump onto a nearby ledge or platform if there isn't enough space for him to do so, waiting for Jade to get out of the way before he makes any attempt to follow. The most prevalent aspect of this dungeon is whatever pey'j can do to help you. A hyper-focused experience dead set on getting you to use your companion as much as possible. You'll run into bugs that you can launch in the air, and then when attacked, enter a slow motion state where you can precisely aim to send them flying, usually into walls, explosives, electricity, etc. This will be the main aspect of combat throughout the experience, but it gets used in a variety of ways, from defeating enemies to unlocking paths to traverse. Since it's just an added aspect of combat and done quickly and without issue, it just feels like a pure upgrade to the system and rarely if ever gets old. Black Isle also further enforces the concept of exploration and hidden creatures to find in a variety of ways. While backtracking in the game isn't extremely prevalent, there will often be times where you finally have Double H with you, or pey'j unlocks his tools, and you will want to go to previously locked off areas in order to break through them. In Black Isle, this leads you to a ledge where you can get a picture of a small creature that is constantly traveling in a loop. You may not even know it's there initially, as it's hidden half the time. But there will be an item later that makes it more obvious for all the collectors out there. There's 1 or 2 optional areas you need pey'j's ability for outside of Black Isle, meaning these are essentially missable locations since we will lose access to pey'j later on. Maybe Double H can open these areas, but I don't believe this to be the case. Just make sure you do your due diligence when exploring. This is a dense, compact game, and aspects of it can come and go in the blink of an eye. And while I can appreciate that as an incentive to look around, I also understand this may be of immense annoyance to other players. Other than what I mentioned, the dungeon is fairly straightforward. We use pey'j to blow up access to new routes, to kill enemies, and there's some Rayman style interactables we need to have Jade use to bring down some bridges and the like. Once we make it to the end, we can snap a picture of the twin creatures we were tasked with finding, but as we quickly learn, these are not some small dom species, but the eyes of a much larger creature known as a Pterolamax. Another creature we can snap a picture of mid-boss battle. A boss battle that is highly reminiscent of Volvagia, I think, from Ocarina of Time, and I know I pronounced that wrong in my Mystical Ninja video. I don't know why, but I always said Ocarina as a kid, and it never registered that this was wrong. Thank you to the countless comments that corrected me on that one. Really appreciate it. Again, the battle isn't anything out of the ordinary. We wait for the creature to show its head, pey'j slams it down, and we deal some damage before it decides to fly around for a bit, adding in a few attacks here and there to make the combat a bit more nuanced as we progress. Once the creature is defeated, Han, the chauffeur of Mr. de Castellac, will show up and reveal that this was all a ruse and a test for Jade to see if she was capable of becoming a member of the Iris network. Han informs us that the Doms have infiltrated both the Alpha sections and the Hyllian government. However, a Hyllian uprising may be enough to defeat the Doms and push them out of the planet's sector. Han asks us to visit the Akuta Bar and talk to Peepers if we are interested in joining the Iris network, and then leaves us to our own devices. Peepers, if you recall, is the man who had the coconut minigame that we played a bit earlier. Han also gives us a passphrase we can use to show we are in with the network. But what I like about it is that it can be used on a variety of unrelated NPCs to see what they do and don't know. One individual may have no idea what you are talking about, while another, like the goat man who lost his family, will curse the Iris network for the problems they caused by standing up against the Doms. The passphrase in its own way is a progression code that can both show us the opinions of those around us and gain us access to secret areas such as a new shop we will be visiting shortly. Our progression is currently locked at the moment as we've done all there is to do, so the next stop is the Akuta Bar and Peepers, who has us play a special version of 3 Coconut Monty that allows us to unlock a room code. This room has a secret entrance to the secret base of the Iris Network's Hillys branch. Here we can meet the rest of the team and ask them about the current situations whenever we progress further through the storyline. This is where the real game begins, and we learn what our tasks for the future are going to be. The governor of Hillys is sympathetic to the Iris Network. She's willing to offer codes to various high security areas, but only if we are willing to send her evidence of the Alpha Section's crimes. This means we need to start breaking into places under Alpha Section control, find incriminating evidence, and then upload it to the governor. By doing so, the governor will use her access to find codes for us when we take pictures of various barcodes we find in these locations to unlock the relevant doors, gates, etc. Our first mission is to locate a lost agent by the name of Double H, who I've mentioned previously. Double H went to the Neutrophils factory to investigate the Alpha Sections and hasn't been heard from since. We need to do the same while also finding Double H and freeing him if possible, giving us some direction on what's next. Only issue is the factory is guarded by a tractor beam robot that will prevent us from entering, meaning we will need some more pearls so we can afford the neutralizing cannon from Mammago Garage. Luckily, we are also given a city pass that allows us to access the rest of the city, although there are still plenty of locked off areas. There is one available to us at the moment, however, and we can traverse a hidden warehouse to find some extra pearls that we steal from the Alpha Sections. We can also gain access to Ming Su's shop, which sells various goods, namely health upgrades, pearls, and 2 key items we need to help with our 100% progression. Ming will sell both a pearl and an animal locator. These devices will show the areas of pearls and animals on our map, while also telling us the number that are detected in any given area, meaning we can check out previously explored locations and see if we missed anything, which will probably be the case in somewhere like Black Isle unless you were incredibly diligent. If we talk to Ming and use the passphrase, he will unlock a special location within his shop where we can grab issues of the Iris Network magazine, showing that they have been doing this for some time and we are joining a group of individuals who have already built something for themselves. Unlike the typical voice messages we get from the paper, these are full M discs we can use at the nearby readers to see what the Iris Network has uncovered so far. Once we've collected all there is to collect, completing more looters' caverns and the like thanks to the neutralizing cannon, we can make our way to the factory and begin exploring immediately. Like I mentioned about the lost levels, there was to be a hovercraft section within here that would have been greatly appreciated and bolstered the trek to and from the factory. Unfortunately, it was scrapped, and other than that one robot we destroyed with our new cannon, there isn't much preventing us from reaching it and no real challenge to experience. While Black Isle was the first real introduction to the game's dungeon system, the factory is definitely the more thought out and developed of the two, most likely due to how late in development Black Isle ended up being in comparison. The factory seemed to be in development almost from the get-go and was one of the main focuses on the vertical slice, originally meant to be the main introduction to these segments. It introduces security lasers, stealth mechanics, and more, fully expanding on what we've come to expect from our first foray. Pey'j understandably doesn't want to go anywhere near the factory, both for wanting to keep Jade out of danger and due to the presence of a Reaper, a biological life form on Hillys that has been taken over by the Doms. Luckily for us, we won't see this beast for some time, but it will lead into one of my favorite boss battles in the entire game. The factory is noticeably bigger from the other areas we've explored so far, and while there are many branching paths to explore, they all lead to dead ends or to areas we can't access until we get a specific item or upgrade. The main goal we have is to reach a section of the factory where we can take pictures of the Alpha Section's actions against the people of Hillys, and Iris will mark these locations as possible spots of Alpha Section activity. For the factory, Slaughterhouse, and Moonbase, these will be the main loops we work through as we traverse and sneak through the various sections. On top of things like security lasers, we also learn about electrical conductivity that will become very important in the exploration that follows. We can move conductive objects around to remove electrical barriers as their charge gets pulled somewhere else, and you may also notice a broken door switch that can be charged by moving a nearby ceiling fan. One of these electrical rooms houses a sort of Easter egg animal for us to snap a picture of. Within a freezer, we can find a dead and decaying cow. And no, not a cow person, an actual cow. While we may think this is a picture we are supposed to snap, that isn't the case. For whatever reason, the cow must not be from this planet. This may have to do with the fact that the actual photo we need is a mosquito feeding off of the cow's carcass, named Aedis Raymanis, a nod to the Rayman series the team worked on prior. I'm no Rayman expert, but maybe the cow is also featured in one of the team's previous games. You'll also be running into a lot more rats from here on out. While pre-development seemed to have large seas of rats ready to attack you, this was later toned down into small groups of singular creatures that are more a nuisance than a threat. Rats may attack you if you get too close, and all you need to do is kick them once to essentially obliterate them from existence. This is most annoying in stealth sections where a rat attacking you could give you away to the enemy. It's just another obstacle to overcome in those sections, but here they seem to be around just to fill the void and to bother you periodically. Through a large portion of the factory, we end up detached from pey'j and H once we unlock him. These sections are used to focus on the game's stealth elements, which we had yet to see so far. Stealth, like everything else in the game, is aggressively simplistic. Jade will need to crouch and hide behind waist-high walls in order to keep out of sight of the alpha sections. If they see her, they initiate combat, and we are put into a rather disadvantageous position. The Alpha Section soldiers will almost always be facing us during these game states and will have a shield out preventing us from damaging them. Their main weak point is an air tank found on their back, so attacking them head-on is rather useless unless you have the charged projectile move I mentioned earlier, as they can swing around the back of an enemy and put them into a vulnerable state. The main idea is that, should you get caught, you will run and hide, usually in small pits that are found throughout these maps. Once properly hidden, the soldier will perform a scanning operation, where a small robot will look at your last known location and use a series of lasers to fill the room before blowing them up and one-shotting you if they hit. These are easily avoided, but are intensely satisfying to watch. However, the game makes it even easier to escape most times, and simply running out of the room is enough to immediately put the soldiers back into a non-combative state. It's a bit cheesy, and I wish each room locked you in, forcing you to utilize the mechanics that stealth is tied to. Most enemies you can just sneak by, so that's usually the best course of action. However, getting close to an enemy from behind will allow you to kick their air tank, and then a second hit while they are preoccupied will kill them in a cartoonishly comedic and gruesome manner. This is the main way I end up playing nowadays, to sort of brute force myself through these areas, but patience is key for many of these sections. To make things even easier, we will be using our first time away from pey'j to find the room holding our next companion, H. Currently stuck in some sort of cocoon that is zapping the life force out of him. Addendum's Spirit Eater seems to be the cause of this, and we can grab a nearby glove that will allow us some new ranged capabilities. By shooting gyro discs at enemies from afar, we can snap a picture of H as evidence and then destroy the Spirit Eater to free him. These gyro discs can be used within stealth sections of the game. If you don't want to get close to an enemy, you can wait for them to turn around and shoot their weak point. Even if there is a second soldier in the area, this usually distracts them long enough for you to run up from behind, trivializing sweeping challenges throughout the game. Luckily, the glove does get used in some more creative aspects down the line, such as using it to activate buttons, some of which will turn on platforms that kill unsuspecting soldiers by carrying them into electrified death zones. We can free H, but he'll be a bit worse for wear, his head turned into jelly as he tries to get his bearings. After a back and forth, he'll join us as a companion, but only temporarily as we still have pey'j with us, just not right at the moment. This is also the introduction to H's unique companion ability where he breaks through barred doors for us, although this causes him to fall to his potential demise. Don't worry, he's fine, we'll see him later. Following the newly opened path, we get sent back to the hub area for the dungeon, where the broken elevator and signs of a Reaper were first shown to us. Unfortunately, the Reaper finally makes himself known and pey'j attempts to save us from him only to get captured for the entirety of the boss fight. I said I love this fight, and I do mean that. You can melee the Reaper, but it's incredibly agile and will jump to high-reaching surfaces that we can't hit him from. Luckily, the gyro discs allow us to poke him in the eye, adding aspects of skill shots to the battle. He'll then perform a cinematic jump where the camera angle changes momentarily and we get a sort of second-person view of our character from the enemy's perspective, while still having full movement control, meaning we can position ourselves in a way that he doesn't land on us. Since he'll block gyro discs at his eye while on the ground, we have to alternate between melee and ranged attacks as he continues to jump away from us. And if you forgot to take a picture of the beast, don't worry, he falls to his death in a nearby interior moat of sorts and we can take a picture of the corpse before we leave. Gruesome. While you may have thought this was where Pey'j disappears on us, that's not the case. He'll be with us for a bit longer, but we now need to use the gyro disc to enter a new area with the ceiling fan I mentioned, and to try and get our hands on some fuses and a keycard. Now, as much as I love Beyond Good and Evil, I would say both the Slaughterhouse and Factory, and even the Moon Base, now that I think about it, have their own specific areas that made me pull my hair out as a kid. The first one appears in the keycard area. After defeating some enemies and grabbing the card, we can press a button to turn this generator off and to grab a nearby fuse we need for the elevator. Here's the thing though, it may not be immediately obvious to you that there is a second fuse on the other side of the room behind the generator, or obvious that you need the second fuse to begin with. If you don't grab it now, you may forget about it, and this will lead to an issue where we want to leave the factory as we need a second fuse to power a door. I remember being a kid and having no idea about this, trying to figure out where the heck I would have missed another fuse and spending a large portion of my time trying to figure it out only to find it in the same room that I found the first one. This is an odd choice considering the game generally has items you need slightly off the beaten path as you progress or directly on your way. For this one to be semi-hidden doesn't fit with the rest of the level design, so I find it at least slightly confusing if you made the mistake of missing it due to being distracted by the battle. That's the only real issue I have with the level design in the factory, however. Everything else is mostly very clear. I do find that it's sometimes not obvious what ledges are actually climbable for Jade from time to time, and this will be the main issue I have with an aspect of the Slaughterhouse, as we'll see when we get there. With the fuse in hand, we can bring it to a nearby elevator and Pey'j can finish fixing it, giving us a one-way trip up to another section of the factory so that we can get more pictures. On this elevator ride, Pey'j hands us an M-disc he says came for her the other day. Jade grills Pey'j for not giving it to her sooner, as it could have been a mission, and he apologizes in an awkward way where things don't seem to be as clear as he's making it out to be. Gee, I sure hope nothing happens to Pey'j, causing us to check the M-disc he gave us, leading to a bit of a gut-wrenching scene. Sure hope that doesn't happen. We need to leave Pey'j's side to grab a picture for the governor. This time it seems that the crates being shipped from the factory are holding people within. We can get an incriminating photo by waiting for one of the crates to move on a conveyor into a X-ray machine, and then snap a pic of the skeleton within. There's a nearby barcode, but we can't get the code for it until we grab another picture, and we're at a bit of a dead end, so we need to head back to Pey'j in order to progress. Unfortunately, as we make our way back, we can hear Pey'j being attacked by Alpha Section soldiers who beat the ever-loving pork out of him for all of us to see. By the time Jade reaches Pey'j, it's too late, and he's being dragged away behind a large door that we can't immediately open fast enough to chase them down. There's an M-disc reader here, and we can check the disc that Pey'j gave us to see what was on it. As expected, it was from the Pigman himself, and explains that Pey'j loves Jade and has enjoyed taking care of her for her parents all this time. They traveled to Hillys and it was peaceful, but the war eventually arrived. To get here, Pey'j used a spaceship known as the Beluga, and it's hiding somewhere on the Lighthouse Island. In order to find it, he shows us a picture of a noteboard he has in his office, suggesting that there's a clue to it there. The first time you watch this M-disc, you will get a small scene of Jade contemplating that her uncle is truly gone, and this really does hit hard considering how much of a bond we have formed with him throughout the game up to this point. Pey'j has always cared about Jade and her well-being. The two bounce off one another easily in a way that feels natural. There's chemistry there, and with him captured, we as the player feel that same yearning desire to save him that Jade does. Eventually we find Pey'j's shoes in a nearby closet, suggesting they had been stripped off of him once he was shipped. If you remember what I mentioned previously, all items can be fully examined within our inventory. If you take the time to do this with Pey'j's shoes, you'll see that there are 2 codes underneath, and we'll use these later at the Lighthouse to find the Beluga. With Pey'j captured, we need to finish the mission. We'll run into Double H again momentarily, but we won't see him fully until we get to this section's final boss fight. First, we need one more picture, this time showing us what the Alpha sections look like with their helmets off, showing that the Doms themselves have in fact fully taken over many of the soldiers. Once we have the pictures taken and make it to the final area, a Spirit Eater seems to be talking to an infected soldier. As they notice us, they use a pearl to make a mechanical boss for us to fight, but this has to be the absolute worst one in the game. Mostly because you just have to knock its legs out together with Double H and then hit a pearl with a gyro disc. But this just stun locks the enemy the entire time, not letting it do anything for the entirety of the fight. As it's defeated, we learn that Pey'j and all the other captured civilians have been taken to a place known as the Slaughterhouse, and Jade pledges to get him back. But we still have to get out of the factory and report back to the Iris network before we can move forward. I should also mention that we get another different keycard here, and both can be used outside of the factory to access hidden Alpha Section's bases where pearls can be found. I don't understand why though. These cards being universal is fine, but the fact that the game gives us 2 in one dungeon and then basically nothing new in the Slaughterhouse was very odd to me. You'd expect the triangle card to be in the factory and the square card to be in the Slaughterhouse, but instead they stuff almost all of the unlockables in the first place you visit. Before we can leave properly, his time in the weird brain jelly chamber seems to finally catch up to Double H, and he has to turn on his ventilators due to being unable to breathe. We have to race against the clock to get him back to the Iris network hidden base, but this time limit isn't particularly pressing. We just rush him back and the team there begins fixing him up, stating it would take him around a week or so to recover, which I find really funny, as once we leave the HQ, he's immediately ready to go like nothing ever happened. I don't know if this is meant to show how much conviction he has or his duty, or if it was just a mix-up with the storyline and mechanics somewhere in development. The governor will reward us with donations from the Hillian people as well. Now that a new issue of the Iris Network magazine is out, more people seem to be realizing what is up with the alpha sections and donate a multitude of pearls to the cause. These are mechanically a means of making sure that the player is close enough to affording their next upgrade, in case they haven't been exploring as much as they should have, and I think that's a bit of a cop-out. The game is considered too short by the developers, so they add in extra content to elongate it, yet they also offer periodic rewards that speed up the entire collection process, thus lowering the playtime while giving players a reason to not look around. It feels counterintuitive. Finally, we can talk to some of the agents in the HQ, and we will learn that the leader of the Hillys section of the Iris network has gone dark. The team is unsure if he's been captured or gone into hiding, but this coincides with Pey'j getting captured, further asserting that he is the leader of the Iris network and giving you a little reward for talking to everyone periodically, allowing you to figure this out on your own before the big reveal. With Double H's new ability in our arsenal and the key cards, we can clear out some more of the city of Hillys proper and some exterior zones as well. These are mostly similar to what we've already experienced before. However, one plus a later section once we finish the Slaughterhouse offer a chase sequence that we don't get to see very often within the game. In fact, the idea that these chase sequences are only seen in optional areas you may miss is baffling to me considering how much fun they are. Definitely a sequence that could have been fleshed out more and placed in various other locations of the game. They're heavily cinematic as well, especially in the second one as we are being chased by none other than General Keck himself. I hate that name. I hate it. We have the ability to buy a new item from Mammago, and we'll need it to get to the Slaughterhouse as it is outside the bounds of the energy barrier that we see while traveling throughout Hillys. However, you can stop by Ming's shop and find a new issue of the Iris Network magazine. This will use the exact pictures you took in order to get evidence within the factory, and while that might sound obvious, I feel as though I've seen in too many games that ask us to snap a picture of something that they use pre-rendered ones when it's shown throughout the game. Maybe that's just me, but I like that our work is actually displayed like that. Many of the Hillians will read this magazine, and you can see a change within the city as they begin to protest. Small groups at first, but this will grow with the more we bring to light. The alpha sections are also on full damage control, trying to claim that what happened at the factory was a terrorist attack or something rather than just one journalist and her pig uncle. Seeing the world actively change is a breath of fresh air considering we are returning to the city multiple times throughout the game. It's a great way to gauge our progress while also showing the potential for the people to rise up against their alien oppressors. With all of that out of the way, heading to Mammago will allow us to purchase the jump kit, which we can use to get over the barriers blocking us from the Slaughterhouse races, new animals, and some extra content for collecting pearls. It also leads to one of the freakiest out-of-bounds checks that I have ever seen in any game ever. Straying too far into the ocean will cause you to receive a warning stating you are heading out of territorial waters and to turn back. If you keep progressing further, giant towers begin to rise up out of the infinite nothingness of the ocean, towering over you like the Eye of Sauron. Get any closer and they begin to blast you with these giant energy attacks that shoot you back to the main game zone. It probably has something to do with the vastness of the ocean and the fear that comes from being in the middle of it, plus the colossal size of the towers. But even today, I find it extremely terrifying. It reminds me of running into that giant tornado frog in Wind Waker randomly. While we have the means to head to the Slaughterhouse now thanks to our new ability to jump with our hovercraft, a feature that isn't used much outside of progression past those barriers, we still have two other things we can take care of at the moment. Those would be finding the beluga and starting the 20th anniversary treasure hunt that was added in the latest release. If we head back to the Lighthouse, we can find one of those note boards in Pey'j's workshop. Interacting with it reveals a code lock that we need the password for. But where do we get these codes? Like I mentioned, Pey'j has two of them on the bottom of his jet boots that we found back at the factory. Now originally I thought that both codes were meant to be inputted right here, but that's not the case. I tried to input one only for it to fail, so I assumed they had to be inputted in a proper order. However, after one of the codes worked for me, the others still failed. This is because the exact same note board can be found in the living space of the upper lighthouse. Why, I have no idea, and how you would figure that out, I'm unsure. However, if you input one code in the lighthouse and one in the hangar, a button will appear that we can press to reveal a secret area of the hangar where the beluga is stored. In terms of repairs, the beluga is basically ready to go. It's just missing two flight stabilizers that I thought I remembered being able to buy at Mammago. You can buy one flight stabilizer there, but not right away. Even if you have the pearls ready for the purchase, the rhinos there will tell you that it's on back order and to wait until it comes in, preventing us from fixing the ship early. I suppose so we can't earn even more pearls to unlock the stellar motor that would send us to the moon, but again, I feel like there's more value in giving us as much of the exploration options as we are willing to unlock at the time. Let me get as many pearls as possible and maybe tie the space engine to some sort of story element since it isn't necessary for the collectathon aspect of the game. And just as another minor issue, even if we do purchase the flight stabilizer, that's only one out of the two we need. How do we get the second one? Well, the second one is right there on the counter next to the ship, and I guess I'm blind because I never see it on a playthrough and I always assume I have to buy both. I must not be able to read either since there's an M disc showing the necessary repairs where Pey'j mentions he needs to install the one stabilizer he already has. So there's plenty to inform you that the stabilizer is on the island, and I guess I was just too stupid to realize this. Luckily, when I went to look at the beluga a second time after buying one of the repair items, I immediately eyed the extra one on the counter. It was just there. If you haven't played the game since before the 20th anniversary edition, you may be surprised to find a new code locker within the secret area of the hangar. This is the new treasure hunt side quest that was added alongside the remaster. There is a knife on a nearby table with the code, and carved into it is the name Nox, a character from Beyond Good and Evil 2. If we use the code on the hangar, we will find another item belonging to another party member from the sequel game, as well as an M disc, and potentially some cosmetic items that we can use to change the appearance of Jade or our vehicles, including both the hovercraft and the beluga. You'll also get a small key card that has a map on it instead of a symbol. The idea is that you need to match the map to a specific location in the game to find the next locker, a couple of which that could be found before this point but were inaccessible due to the missing code. Each disc contains a brief message sent to Pey'j about Jade and her interactions with the various members of the pirate crew. Since we used Nox's knife to unlock the locker, he's the first one we hear about. Then we learn about Yashawn, Uma, and Callum and Primera in order. Although we can't unlock Callum's locker until we have access to flight. Each code item we find in one locker is a memento that belonged to the crew member featured in the next one. Once we find Callum's, we are given a star compass that we can bring back to the hangar and slot into a nearby computer. Doing so produces a brand new cutscene, although Jade has no reactions and nothing to say in it. I assume due to some issue with getting the voice actor for such a small segment or something, I'm unsure. In the cutscene, a hologram of Dakini, the captain of the pirate crew, appears to talk directly to Jade. Cool little addition there, but no follow-up or thought from Jade leaves it feeling a little anticlimactic. It suggested based on events that Jade may have been the adopted daughter of Dakini and that Callum is seen as an adoptive father figure, with Pey'j being the uncle and Uma being the aunt. It's possible Dakini is the biological mother of Jade, but we don't know enough about her backstory yet to say for sure. From the sequel trailers, we see that at some point, Jade is taken control of by the Alpha sections when she's younger. At another point, it seems she is freed and on the run with pey'j as they live their lives on Hillys. It's honestly staggering how much content we have for the sequel at this point. Even this most recent release, this remaster, has important lore used to build up the characters before their game is released. It's shocking that we would be teased like this considering the game seems to be in the pits of development hell, but considering this version of the game only came out months ago, maybe it's meant to give us hope that there is an end in sight, and that we will get to play Beyond Good and Evil 2 at some point in time, no matter how bleak it looks at the moment. Now that the extra content is done, it's time to go find pey'j and further expose the alpha sections for the DOMS-controlled tyrants that they are. However, there's no easy way into the Slaughterhouse at the moment. Luckily, the Iris network found a potential back route within the 3rd and 4th races found behind the Lighthouse. And now that we have the jump kit, we can finally reach them. I really wish the jump kit offered more varied experiences than it does. There are a few small sections where jumping can help us navigate around debris and the like, but this would have been a great time to add in some more nuanced platforming areas using our vehicle, leading to more skillfully intensive trails to explore. Unfortunately, we only get one such segment and we'll be seeing it shortly. You may be surprised to hear that it's the races that get us into the Slaughterhouse. Races in Beyond Good and Evil are instanced events usually restricted to a couple laps before completing. They aren't exactly free roam areas, although nothing is technically preventing us from exploring them if we want to go out of our way. It's kinda like the speedways in the Spyro games. What I like to do is complete both races for the Pearl reward, then I head back into race 3 and search around until I find a secret side passage. It's this passage that will re-instance us into a new area where we will now find ourselves on the trail towards the Slaughterhouse, with one of the best hovercraft segments in the game. For whatever reason, the road to the Slaughterhouse is guarded by a giant spider robot that shoots various beams and blasts of energy at you. It's the only segment like this in the game, and while I'm a firm believer in the less is more philosophy of game mechanic design, Beyond Good and Evil still knows that it can bolster its playtime by adding in multiple versions of different aspects such as the Looter's Caverns, vehicle boss fights, etc. I'm not saying they should be exact replicas, but when you have a good thing like vehicle segments that lead to major dungeons, you'd imagine that you would consider adding more of those to the experience. One for the factory, one for the Slaughterhouse, and maybe a flying section for the moon. These were ideas the team had after all, and there was a base in the space section where you would have had to fly through various cavernous locations before making it to an area where you could progress on foot. There's many aspects of Beyond Good and Evil that get introduced that you expect to be fleshed out more when you progress, only for them to never show up again. The Slaughterhouse spider battle being one aspect, the limited amount of flying another, with more as we continue the adventure throughout the game. And when we finally reach the Slaughterhouse, the biggest dungeon we will have experienced so far, I can confidently say I believe it to be the weakest aspect of the game for a multitude of reasons, namely how confusing it is to navigate, how poorly conveyed certain access points are, and a lack of features such as boss fights despite every other dungeon having one before it. In terms of mechanics, the Slaughterhouse plays out almost exactly like everything else we've seen so far, and since we've unlocked all there is to unlock already, there isn't really much for us to discover apart from the usual exploration. So we have an incredibly confusing area that doesn't really offer us anything new, starting us in a moat section we need to navigate through. This moat section requires us to destroy various obstacles using homing torpedoes that follow us from an enemy robot. Once through, we can unlock various shortcuts to make our trip back a bit easier. However, first we need to get the pictures and evidence. In order to do that, we start at a security checkpoint or surveillance room where my biggest issue with the dungeon rears its head. To get past this checkpoint, we need to hit a switch that will open the gate. To get to a position where we can hit the switch, we need to squeeze through a section that Double H can't follow. The easiest way to do this is to head through, do some exploring, and then shoot a gyro disc at the button to raise the gate so we can make it back to the hovercraft. It's timed, of course, so we need to hurry back. Doing so allows us to park on the other side of the gate or continue forward, but we can't get the hovercraft back out without a barcode, meaning we need to collect all available evidence before we leave. Here's the issue. There are 3 major pieces of evidence and each of them is in a major section of the Slaughterhouse. You would think, having gotten the hovercraft past the gate, you have solved the puzzle of the surveillance room, but the truth is that you are only half done. While it's not obvious, the button we pressed has some ledges near it that Jade can climb up, allowing her to reach another ledge on the gate itself, meaning we can raise the gate and Jade alongside it, allowing her to reach sections previously inaccessible. But how could we do that? We can't aim at the button from this angle, and Double H wasn't able to squeeze through with us, right? Well, if you get the hovercraft past this section, you may not think to immediately dock it and retread the ground that you just explored. Instead, you will most likely continue forward to the rest of the Slaughterhouse, leading to you completing 2 of the 3 major sections, where you sneak around, platform through a couple areas, fight your way through others, and then get some pictures, those being of some sarcophagus Domsey in Alpha Section Control, and of people being shipped off in crates into the Slaughterhouse further. But that's only 2 of the pictures, so where is the 3rd that will let us leave? Well, checking the map to see where the Alpha Section's hotspots are, we can see that there seems to be one back near the surveillance room, but we fully explored that, or so we thought, so what do we do? The answer is that we need to dock on the other side of the gate and climb back up to the room using a ledge only accessible once we get the hovercraft past. This ledge is wide enough that Double H can follow us up there to press the button I mentioned and raise the gate with us on it. This allows us to get further into an area and unlock a door for Double H to pass through. There's multiple design choices here that I believe are not conveyed very well, and these lead to me forgetting where to snap the final picture. Even during this playthrough I had this issue because it had been so long. Imagine playing this as a kid and having no idea what to do here, having gotten this far and thinking that maybe you're just stuck forever. We have a gate we open and then progress through without it being clear we need to backtrack slightly, and we have ledges that are not clearly labeled as such. And I'm not asking for the yellow paint or whatever that weird nerds online get so mad about, but the team has shown the ability to use level design in order to direct you to these ledges so that you know how to use them, at least in a general sense. This time, in a much more open-ended area, it's hard to tell what is interactable in this way and what isn't, leading to these sort of dead ends where you are unsure what to do. The final picture is of more people being shipped throughout the Slaughterhouse. Everyone is being loaded up into space shuttles and sent to the moon of all places, suggesting the Doms have something going on there. If that's the case, it's most likely where pey'j has been taken and we need to get there somehow. If only we had some sort of whale-themed flying machine we could install a space engine onto. Again, there's no boss fight here. That may be because of the open-ended free roam aspect of the area, which I can appreciate. Letting us explore and take pictures in any order we want is a nice change of pace in comparison to the linearity we have experienced thus far, but due to this, it seems it wasn't beneficial in the team's eyes to add a boss fight anywhere in here. Maybe because they couldn't control where you would be at certain trigger points, meaning the boss fight could end up feeling anticlimactic. Instead, we get our second fight with the giant snake skeleton when we escape, slightly upgraded from our previous encounter, but basically the same fight overall. Returning to the city, we can see that even more individuals are protesting now, as a new issue of the Iris Network magazine has been released. Additionally, the propaganda is being laid on even more thickly as the Alpha sections begin to state that we attacked the Slaughterhouse as well. Entering HQ, we don't just receive another large collection of pearls, but we also get to see the governor face to face, the woman who has been helping us with the codes all this time. On top of the monetary reward, we also get a special security keycard that only has one real use, that being a section of the city that was blocked off from us. This is one of the chase sequence missions I mentioned. After doing some sneaking around, we get chased by a bunch of Alpha sections, including General Keck himself. As we make our escape, he tells his men to let us get away since we will lead to a much larger prize. I can only assume the larger prize being the orphans from the Lighthouse, as they are about to be captured momentarily. I like that this little optional segment gives you a look into what the general was thinking at the time, explaining why Jade's lighthouse was targeted specifically. While we are talking to the governor, a message comes into the network HQ from the chief of the Hillys section. However, the voice sounds familiar and Jade realizes that it's her uncle pey'j. This is where everyone begins to realize that not only are the chief and pey'j one and the same, but he also seems to have gotten the means to transmit a message to the team back on Hillys. With what little time he has, pey'j tells the team to give Jade a message, to read the M-Disc and to find the ship, the Beluga. Luckily, we have already done that, and even more lucky, the second flight stabilizer has finally come in for sale at Mammago Garage, meaning we can head over there to buy it and finally get the beluga off the ground. The revelation that pey'j is the chief of the Hillys Iris network may be a surprising one if you weren't taking the time to talk to the other members, but I really appreciate that those that went that extra step could have inferred this and been rewarded for their extra investigative work. If we head to Mammago and buy the stabilizer, as we leave we will see that the lighthouse has been attacked. This means that the otter from the beginning of the game can't have its picture taken by this point, making it a permanently missable aspect of your collection if you didn't get it already. Maybe there's a failsafe for it, but I don't believe so. If there is, be sure to let me know where to find it in the comments, and then if somebody answers it, be sure to check that first before repeating said comment, please. Exploring the broken lighthouse, we see that all of the kids have been kidnapped by the alpha sections. Jade collapses in grief and projects her feelings of failure and worthlessness onto her dog, which is very sad, of course, but sounds hilarious out of context. Like she's belittling her dog for not being able to save the kids from a bunch of trained, infected military soldiers. Look at this poor giant fuzzball. Double H tries to remotivate Jade, but it looks like there's no fight left in her. Right at the last moment, she gets up and seems ready to find everyone she has lost thus far. In order to do that, we need to head to the hangar and get the beluga up and running. With both flight stabilizers attached, we can launch the ship into Hillys proper and attach it to the hovercraft, giving us access to an extremely underutilized vehicle for the rest of the game. Seriously, while some sections of Hillys are only available to the beluga, and by some I mean pretty much just a volcano segment where we collect a bunch of pearls, there's not much else we get to do with it. It's a neat addition, but has little mechanical use for the entirety of the game. We do get a third fight with the snake skeleton creature this time in the air, but that's about it until we reach the moon. By this point, you have everything you need to collect all the remaining pearls. We'll need them too in order to purchase the costly space engine that will let us leave the planet. There's more pearls in the game than are necessary to complete it, meaning there are a multitude of ways that we can go about getting enough to make the purchase. However, you would expect there to be a reward for collecting everything, and you'd be right. Kind of. Once all the pearls are collected, one of the rhinos at Mammago sends you an M-disc with a unique minigame. There's no real point to it, it has a high score to beat, but that's all. It doesn't unlock anything for you until later releases when achievements became a thing. In the minigame, you control 2 pearls, one on each analog stick. You need to navigate both pearls past obstacles to earn extra lives and accrue points over time. There's only 2 obstacle courses to get through, each with their own boss of sorts, but these levels will repeat faster and faster every time you complete them, making it easier to accrue points as I believe you get more the faster the level progresses. It's a very basic bare-bones minigame added just as a reward. But I like to grab the high score in it anyway just for the achievement's sake. It's not really 100% otherwise, right? Additionally, you can get every animal picture except for one, assuming you haven't missed any of the permanent options. The final animal will be found orbiting around Hillys for whatever reason. I don't know why it counts since it's not on the planet proper, but it's still pretty cool nonetheless. Once you do have a picture of all of them, you unlock an M-disc that is a photo album of every species you took a picture of. While not mechanically useful, I think this is a wonderful reward, allowing you to look back on your adventure. But with everything done and pey'j on our radar, all we can do now is purchase the space engine and get it installed, allowing us to shoot ourselves into the skies above. For whatever reason, I remember this being seamless a la something like No Man's Sky, and I don't know what made me think that at the time, as I imagined it would have been impossible. Nowadays, it's a relatively short loading screen into space and then another onto the moon, and I don't remember how long these would have been originally on the Xbox or the GameCube, etc. As we make our way into space, there are various constellations we can see surrounding us. In modern re-releases of the game, at least with the 20th anniversary, you can take pictures of one of these constellations for an achievement. The final animal, a space whale frozen in a giant space iceberg, can be seen moving throughout the location. If we shoot it free, we can get a final picture and finish our collection. Now, everything is truly done, and all we have left is heading to the moon base to free our uncle and everyone else that has been captured at this point. Welcome to the moon. As you can see, there isn't much of a lead up other than the small space section we just traversed to. Luckily, there will be a couple more opportunities to use our new flight mechanic throughout this area, even if it's still fairly limited. Immediately, we can see that the moon base is a combination of Alpha Section's tech and some sort of biological alien lifeform design conveying the merging of the two groups to us. In fact, the vast majority of what we are about to explore is heavily alien to us, with the architecture and design bordering on the grotesque. While you may expect the final dungeon in the game to be incredibly large and elaborate as a way of having a finale for the player, this isn't really the case here. Rather, the on-foot sections and puzzles found within are relatively simple and short. The majority of our time is spent moving forward and backtracking as is necessary, without many challenges like stealth sections that we have come to expect. There's a few here and there, but not as many as should be featured near the end of the journey. This is somewhat made up for by some mechanics that take place outside of the base involving the beluga, as well as a few cutscenes and cinematic set pieces to work through. Our main goals are to find Pey'j and to reach the transmitter. Luckily, we can head right in and park the beluga on a landing pad. Immediately, we are going to have two routes we can take. However, one of them requires 3 pressure buttons to be pressed at one time for a door to unlock. Since there are only 2 of us at the moment, it's obvious which direction we are going to be headed. However, this should make you realize that a 3rd individual will be joining our party shortly. I wonder who that could be. We also need to get more evidence of the Alpha Sections working with the DOMs, so hopefully we can kill 2 birds with 1 stone this way. The base itself is fairly uneventful at the start. We spend the grand majority of our time walking around and solving these new light puzzles where we bounce beams of light off of mirrors in order to activate doorways so we can progress further. This culminates once we reach a chamber that is housing Pey'j by himself, currently having the life force sucked out of him. It's for dramatic effect, of course, but I always found it odd that Pey'j was by himself in this situation. Countless Hillians have been kidnapped by the DOMs, but Pey'j has his own unguarded chamber that we can just waltz into and attempt to free him. And free him we do, completing a more elaborate version of the puzzles we've done up to this point, creating star patterns that slowly remove barriers between us and our uncle. I wish we saw more of these puzzles throughout the area, but these seem to only be for reaching and freeing Pey'j. Similar to the electric conductivity brain teasers we sometimes had to solve in the factory or the slaughterhouse, the light puzzles require us to both turn these mirror pillars by hand and also use our gyro disc to knock them into facing different directions. It's very, very basic and would have benefited from showing up more throughout the base as it continued to grow in difficulty, becoming even more elaborate than what we saw with Pey'j as we freed him. While we do manage to free the pig, it isn't all good news. Pey'j seems to be unresponsive and Jade clasps his lifeless hand with hers. Now remember this scene because it gets brought up again momentarily and I think it's weird. Having to leave Pey'j for now, we head back the way we came, which makes no sense considering we need to actually squeeze through a little crevice ahead of us in order to head to where we can take a picture for evidence. Like Double H even says we have to wrap up the report, so why does the game give us back control and suggest we need to backtrack? There's nothing back there for us to access currently. Well, narratively, it's because Pey'j is still alive. As we leave him, we get a voicemail from Iris explaining that their chief has just made contact with them. This would mean that Pey'j is still alive. Rushing back to the chamber, we find Pey'j walking around on a large bridge and he explains that while he did die, it was Jade that saved him because she's special and has some sort of power that will never be explained in this game. Worse yet, they showed this scene of Jade clutching onto Pey'j, only this time there seems to be some sort of mystical, spiritual power emanating from her hands that wasn't visible to us initially. This is where a lot of the criticisms for Jade's journey come from, considering she was a normal woman the entire playthrough, only to now be revealed to be some sort of superhuman individual. The message that Jade is just a normal person and anyone could do what she has supposedly falls a bit flat because of this. That Jade's special actually, that you couldn't do what she has done because you're not, and yet everything she has done has been something anyone could do. That's why I feel the criticism isn't justifiable. Jade has unlocked some sort of potential for the narrative to develop in a sequel or a prequel. Nothing she has done so far has been thanks to these powers. With that in mind, anyone could attempt to do what Jade has done. Her accomplishments are of her own will and merit. Even the final battle that's coming up is won through her own skill. Only after this does she use her powers to free the prisoners within the base. What gets me is that the cutscene hid this fact from us only to show us later as some sort of gotcha. Haha, pey'j is still alive, and Jade has mystical powers that weren't really alluded to that much throughout the playthrough. Sure, pey'j told Jade how special she was to him, but that could be read as him complimenting a loved one. And while Jade had visions with the Spirit Eater, one may assume this was direct contact from the creature specifically, and may also assume this same thing could happen to any other individual who came into close contact with the DOMs. So no, I don't think Jade suddenly having powers has ruined the message of her journey, but I do think it does come out of nowhere just to be led up into future entries within the series. Again, my major issue is with how the game is directing you through the map, because at this point you may be thinking you need to backtrack to the hangar, right? That's what we were just doing after all. Trying to complete a report so we could expose the alpha sections, and that's a really confusing direction to send us because that's not the way we are supposed to go. You make it back to the hangar, you realize that you now have 2 companions instead of 1, and that means you can probably hit those pressure switches and open the door to the transmitter room proper, right? Well sure, except the transmitter computer has a barcode lock and we need evidence to send to the governor before we can get it. So where the heck do we get that evidence? As mentioned, we actually need to backtrack in order to get the cutscene with pey'j, and then we need to re-backtrack to his prison chamber because there's this really weird glass wall. And guess what? You can squeeze through the side of this wall even though it never looked like that would have been possible to me. I always assumed it was just a barricade preventing us from continuing, telling us that we had reached a dead end and to head backwards, but no, we actually need to squeeze through here and head further in to get the evidence we came for. Now, alright, let me just say that this could be my fault. Maybe I had wrongly assumed I was supposed to head backwards. Maybe I could have headed forward, realized I could squeeze through the barricade, and then got the evidence. Then I may have been able to head back towards the transmitter and activate the scene with pey'j. That may have been the intended series of events if it can work that way. I don't know, I can't check because once again, for some reason, this game only allows you to have 1 save slot in the 20th anniversary edition, and I swear, I tried just for the sake of it beforehand and it wouldn't let me through. That could again just be me messing up though. The best way to infer which way you should go is to open your map and see where the alpha section's activity is. That's what I had to do to get my bearings after ending up stuck here. And while the tool does exist, this feels like the game is not properly conveying to us the direction we need to travel. pey'j's chamber feels like a dead end. It makes sense to go backwards. I shouldn't need to check my map every couple minutes in order to correct myself. This isn't Silent Hill 2. Once you get your bearings, you enter into a small stealth section where you need to get past some soldiers so we can spy on General Keck talking directly to the Dom's priestess. It's revealed that the life force of the Hillyans is being used to keep the priestess alive. However, the priestess seems to sense Jade is on the moon and wills General Keck into capturing her, calling her Shawnee, the codename Jade uses with the Iris network. How Jade learned to use Shawnee, which is somehow her real name, or how she is related to the Doms isn't explained. I'd imagine it's some sort of subconscious connection to the alien race, but we get little to no info on it, as I imagine it was meant to be explained in the sequels. Once we have the evidence, we can make it back to the team and head to the transmitter. After almost locking themselves out of the computer, Secundo manages to transmit the evidence to all of the Alpha Section's propaganda machines, showing every Hillyan in the vicinity what has been going on, whether they have been reading the magazine or not. A self-destruct mechanism activates and we have to rush back to the Beluga to escape. Unfortunately, General Keck catches us in a tractor beam using the giant spider vehicle that attacked us back at the Slaughterhouse. This leads into another of the few flying segments we have in the game, forcing us to destroy weak points in order to crash through the spider bot into a nearby moon lake. We can make our way into the ship and take out the remaining Alpha sections in order to turn off the tractor beam. Our run-in with General Keck shows him worse for wear, with the crash mortally wounding him. However, he confirms what we thought. The Doms have been feeding off of other living life forms in order to extend their own lifespan. Worse, Jade has been sought by the Dom's priestess for who knows how long, and it's not planning on letting her slip away again. We need to head back to the base to free the rest of the civilians and take down the priestess, but the Alpha Section's armada attacks on the way there, leading to the only dogfight in the game. Luckily, the citizens of Hillys have begun to rise up, and many of them have brought their ships to the moon in order to drive the Alpha sections out, giving us the opportunity to slip back inside the base. It's a short section, but that's par for the course at this point, and I don't want to keep repeating the fact that I wish they developed these ideas and segments further for repeated use. Once back inside, we can take an elevator down to where the priestess is being kept. She claims that Shani has returned to her, suggesting that Jade is more connected to the Doms than we may have realized, perhaps even suggesting that the priestess is her master. Jade seems to enter some sort of trance, and Pey'j gets captured again as he tries to break her out of it. Whatever it is that Jade was at one point, whatever her origins are, Pey'j seems to have kept them hidden from her. Luckily, H is able to break her out before anything goes too far. What follows is a battle with H where you fight through countless sarcophagus Domzi. The priestess seems to have the power to create projections over the Domzi of individuals she has captured, meaning we end up fighting Pey'j and later H as well as they spawn in. Then there's this awful mechanic where we have to hit the priestess in sequence as she teleports around us. Not an awful mechanic in itself, it actually feels very satisfying, but they do this thing halfway where the game inverts your controls, and I don't know if I'm incapable of this one feature, but I have the most trouble wrapping my head around it. What makes it excruciating is that the priestess hits incredibly hard, so just a few hiccups in the fight can lead to a game over. Again, everything we have done here leading up to the defeat of the priestess was done by some ordinary individual. Jade had been trained in combat, but everything she succeeded at was thanks to her own motivation and hard work. A major message of the game, and one I feel still rings true even with the revelation of her new powers. Even the Hillyans could have been freed over time now that the Doms were pushed back. Jade uses her powers to get them out immediately, ending the game, but I imagine this wasn't a real necessity. As the credits roll, we get a panning shot of the Lighthouse. Not fully rebuilt, but still lived in after the events of the game. The walls are now littered with new pictures of the orphans, Pey'j, and the rest of the Iris network, all coming together as a family to take care of one another. While Jade isn't in sight for all but one of the pictures, it can be inferred that she is the one taking them. However, it's not a purely happy ending. As we continue to pan through the Lighthouse, we get a scene of Pey'j by himself, seemingly infected with the same Dom's virus we saw H dealing with as we rushed him back to the Iris Network HQ. It's a weird cliffhanger since, unless there is something different, we know this can be cured in some capacity. And to make things worse, this was a cliffhanger that still has yet to be resolved. Even if Beyond Good and Evil 2 comes out someday in the future, it's most likely a prequel, meaning we may not know the fate of Pey'j even after its conclusion. And the chances of us getting a third game decades after a still yet to be released prequel seems slim to none. It's a sweet ending with a short epilogue, and while the cliffhanger may leave you waiting for more at the time of release, it's bittersweet returning to it now, knowing how long we have been waiting. But that's the end of Beyond Good and Evil, and the end of Jade's journey for now and maybe forever. Why do you think it's called Beyond Good and Evil? You'd think a title like that would allude to some major themes in the game. Michelle Ansel stated, "For me, the meaning of this title is that you are always in the middle of an internal and external conflict, based on our conception of good and evil. In this game and in our world, propaganda thinks in our place, tells us these are our enemies and these are our friends. When you go beyond the appearances, you discover your own truth. That's the theme of the game, and marketing finally accepted this title, and just replaced the between by beyond, which fits better with the vast universe and story. Beyond Good and Evil is a game about forming your own opinions, about educating yourself and finding the truth in a world filled to the brim with propaganda. While the events that followed 9/11 may have been a huge factor in the themes of the game, this concept still rings true even today. We are constantly pelted with propaganda from all forms of media, and it can be difficult to figure out what's the truth and what is part of the agenda. You don't have to be a tinfoil hat conspiracy nut to grasp this. It's just a well-known fact about how media is used by those in power. Media has influence. It forms our opinions over us, and if we don't want to be stuck being fed how to think, we often need to educate ourselves, be critical, and stay informed. That's the lesson Jade teaches us here, and I think that type of theming is more important today than it ever has been, when we can watch our own governments try to vilify victims of war crimes and genocides throughout the world. You could think of Beyond Good and Evil as ahead of its time. Maybe not thematically, as it has always been relevant, but mechanically for sure. A game like this, where you play as a journalist trying to expose the wrongdoings of your own government, came out at a time when many games were focusing more on action-adventure fantasy tales over overtly political ones. The fact that the game has remained so relevant is one of the reasons I believe it continues to grow as a cult classic. One of the reasons I hold out hope that the sequel will still one day release. A game that will most likely hold similar political views and messaging, but will get a lot more flack for it due to the immense radicalization of the internet with social media in particular. I'm looking at you, Twitter. We all know what you are now. While not managing to do everything it strives to do well, and often not expanding on those positive features as much as it should have, I still believe everything within the package complements one another enough that you get a streamlined, positive experience that is easy to return to every couple of years. Sure, I wish certain features were repeated throughout the game and made more elaborate, but the playtime from start to finish is one that definitely doesn't overstay its welcome. Beyond Good and Evil is an amazing and unique experience that I suggest everyone watching checks out at some point. Even if you ended up spoiled by this retrospective, the mechanics themselves are worth experiencing on your own. This is easily one of my favorite games, and even though the future is looking a little rocky, I am still trying to be as optimistic as I can in the hope that we one day see the sequel I have been waiting over a decade for. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing. I'd love for you to tell me about your own experiences with Beyond Good and Evil and your own hopes for the sequel. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey, thanks so much for making it to the end of the video. This is the Patreon section for all of the Patreon members. If you want to have your name shouted out or be in the credits, like here, it's usually here, feel free to check it out and support me, and it'd be super cool, and I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Shout out to the G-Rank patrons specifically, with Gloomerous, Backdraft 677, Natsuki Mamamura, Brendan Hesse, Wooly, Ralkar, Ashtray, Mo Al Kasemi, Cyberworm, Jonathan, Strangely, Lude Hafumi, Rosalio, and Mr. Janky, who also proofread this script, as is the norm. Thanks so much, Mr. Janky, for proofreading the script, so less people yell at me in the comments. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Thanks for watching, everybody, and I'll see you in the next video. And Merry Christmas. It's Christmas right now. I'm releasing this on Christmas.